Chapter 506. Let me start with 1,000 books. The dragon severing lock is usually the final line of defense used for a fortress. It's designed such that one would be unable to break it unless one's cultivation reaches the required level. Even the celestial designer who set up the trap himself would find it hard to open it. Hall Master Sai's complexion darkened. This was the final resort of celestial designers, similar to how a cultivator self-destructs when forced into a corner. Unless the circumstances were dire, no one would go to such an extent. Usually, it was only to block out one's enemies or to die along with one's nemesis that such a trap would be activated. The moment it fell, there was no way to undo it. Even dragons would be unable to enter, thus the name dragon severing. Unless one's strength surpassed the tolerance limit of the wall, one wouldn't be able to break it. In this case, it was transcendent mortal 9 Dan. Otherwise, it was futile. Then, doesn't that mean that we can't leave? Even the strongest of them was only a transcendent mortal 4 Dan. Under such circumstances, wouldn't they be locked down forever? If they couldn't even break the wall, how could they leave the area? Let me take a look. Frowning, Zhongxian walked up to the stone door, touched it with his finger, and a book appeared in the Library of Heaven's Path. Grade 6 Dragon Severing Lock, designed and crafted by 6-star celestial designer Hu Yangzi. It is crafted from a unique material, making it extremely resilient. Flaws number 1, the crafting method. After reading through the book, Zhongxian's face turned extremely awful. Even though Dragon Severing Lock had its flaws, it wasn't something that someone of his level of strength could exploit. In other words, what the other party said was true. No one of strength below transcendent mortal 9 Dan could break this wall. What should he do? Were they really going to be trapped here until their death? Just as Zhongxian was ransacking his mind for a solution, Zhao Feiwu's voice echoed, "There's no need to worry. Since he intends to possess one of us, there must be another escape route. Otherwise, how does he intend to get out?" That's right. Everyone was stunned for a moment before their eyes lit up. Since this fellow was going to possess one of them, he must have an escape route ready for himself. After all, how could he plunge himself into this kind of desperate situation? "We can find a way to leave after we deal with this fellow. Our most imminent danger isn't regarding our confinement," Zhongxian said. Even if they couldn't get out, the rations in their storage rings were sufficient to sustain everyone here for several years. Factoring in the spirit stones they had on top of that, it should be impossible for them to die out of natural causes within the short term. Currently, the greatest threat they were facing was the owner of the tomb. If they didn't find and eradicate the hidden soul oracle, they would surely be unable to get out of here alive. Hearing Zhongxian's words, the voice harumphed coldly. "Deal with me? Are you sure you have the capability to do so? Regardless of whether we do or not, we still have to give it a try." Stepping forward, Jin Songhai flicked his wrist and took out a jade bottle. Then, he carefully surveyed the surroundings, as though trying to find the other party's location. "Give it a try. Let me show you how laughable that idea is then." Woo! After that, a ray of light suddenly shot across the hall. Before Jin Songhai could react, he was struck squarely on his chest. Pu! He flew all the way back and crashed heavily against the wall. Huge mouthfuls of blood gushed from him. Elder Jin, not expecting that the strongest member, Jin Songhai, would be defeated in a single move, everyone clenched their fists tightly. To be capable of subduing a transcendent mortal 4 Dan in an instant, even if the other party wasn't a 6-star soul oracle, he still wasn't someone that they could deal with. Even though Jin Songhai was injured, Zhongxian didn't panic. Rather, he made use of this opportunity to quickly glance at the direction where the light appeared from. Wang. A book appeared in the Library of Heaven's Path. Zhongxian hurriedly flipped it open and read through it. "It's an attack from a mechanical trap." Zhongxian frowned. The previous attack didn't come from the Soul Oracle but a mechanical trap. In other words, it was impossible for him to locate the other party from the previous attack. It's impossible for the Soul Oracle to show any opening that would betray his location. Otherwise, we would be able to guard against him and hinder his possession. Upon seeing Zhongxian's action, Luo Zhu immediately sent a telepathic message over. "That's true. Zhongxian nodded his agreement. When a soul oracle possessed the body of another, they would enter via one's acupoints. If one were to seal the acupoint in advance and repel the soul oracle, it would become extremely difficult for the soul oracle to succeed. After all, what the soul oracle was doing was expelling the original soul of the body and forcefully fusing their soul with the body. If the original owner were to struggle violently, it might cause irreparable damage to the body. If so, it would be meaningless even if the soul oracle successfully possessed the body. This was the reason why that fellow would not allow himself to be noticed until he struck. Besides, it was also possible that a member of the group might have some specialized equipment to deal with souls. This would put him at risk. Don't even think of finding me. It's impossible for you all to kill me, you're all still too weak. Hearing the telepathic conversation between the duo, the voice continued haughtily, since you have entered my tomb, you should have been prepared to be possessed. However, I can only possess one of you, so the rest will be safe. Safe? Ha, like it would be that simple. Hall Master Sai harumphed. Given how the other party locked all of them in this chamber, how could it be so simple? He didn't believe that the other fellow would allow any of them to leave after successfully possessing one body. After all, soul oracles were a forbidden existence. If news that one had possessed the body of another were to get out, that person would surely be pursued to the ends of the world. By safe, I meant that you won't have to die for the time being. As for how long you can live for, it'll depend on your choice. The voice chuckled. Choice? Zhongxian frowned. The voice said, indeed. I'll give you all 2 choices now. I have a total of 3 trials here. If you can clear the trials, I will consider sparing you. However, you still won't be allowed to leave. I will leave you here to do whatever you need to survive. Trial? Everyone was taken aback. Wasn't this fellow going to possess them? What in the world were the trials for then? Zhongxian was also perplexed. Usually, trials would only be prepared for the various examinations for master teachers and the other unique occupations. Given how powerful the other party was, killing them should be a walk in the park. What was the point of going through so much trouble? However, given that they were stuck now and that the other party had control over the mechanical traps, their life and death were in the hands of the other party. No matter how bewildered they weren't in the position to reject the other party's conditions. What about the alternative option? Zhongxian asked. The other option is that I'll kill you all one by one until someone is willing to challenge the trial. The voice harumphed. Not expecting the second condition to be about the trial as well, the crowd felt even more baffled. What was this fellow's motive for insisting for them to challenge the trial? Could this be selection of the reception lamb? Luo Zhu suddenly asked. Selection of the reception lamb? Zhongxian's mouth twitched. Selection of the reception lamb was a term commonly used by herders. Usually, when a guest visited, a herder would slaughter a lamb to welcome him. However, how to choose the most suitable lamb to welcome the guest warmly was a problem. Thus, they would allow the lamb to run on the fields. The one that ran the fastest and most happily would surely have the best meat texture. Could the soul oracle be intending to do the same as well? Through the trials, he would choose the one possessing the most suitable physical constitution to possess. This way, his soul could better fuse with the body and the decline of his cultivation would be minimized. That's very possible. Contemplating over the issue for a moment, Zhongxian nodded his head in agreement. There was a high possibility that this was the case. Which body to possess was also an important choice for a soul oracle as well. Taking that soul which possessed Luo Zhu previously, not only did his cultivation plummet, it would also be very difficult for him to successfully fuse with the body. Even if he were to succeed, due to the incompatible constitution, his future achievements would have been limited as well. Making an analogy, it was just like forcing a person adept in swordsmanship to use a hammer instead. No matter how good a physical body was, as long as it was incompatible, one would be unable to bring out its full strength. It was highly possible that that fellow was harboring such thoughts when asking them to challenge the trials. Through the selection, he would find the most suitable constitution for him to possess. Otherwise, how could an ancient soul be so bored as to seal the chamber using the dragon severing lock just to fool around with them? Most probably, he had already decided on this from the moment the group entered the tomb. The main reason why he didn't make any move earlier was to wait until they entered this passageway so as to seal their escape route. Only then did he finally reveal his existence. That's right, I'm indeed choosing the finest lamb among you lot. Why, are you afraid? Hearing their conversation, the voice sounded once more. Afraid? Why would we be? Shaking his head, Zhongxian said. Where is your trial? Bring it out so that we can take a look. That's more like it. Seeing Zhongxian agree to the matter, the voice sounded a little pleased. Don't think that I won't lay my eyes on you just because you failed the trial. My selection criterion is your constitution, not the speed and means you use to clear the trial. Remember this, only those who pass the trial will not be killed. Those who fail regretfully, you'll have to bid everyone else farewell. Hong Long. The ground tremored and a massive stone tablet appeared in the center of the hall. This is the most basic soul-guiding formula of the soul oracles. Study it, and within 10 days, you must be able to draw your soul out of your body to clear the trial. Otherwise, the traps will eliminate you immediately. The voice instructed impassively. Soul-guiding formula? Looking at the stone tablet, Zhongxian saw a dense congregation of words on it. The 3 large words inscribed at the very top seemed to pierce straight into one's soul, jolting one's consciousness. Soul-guiding formula. The cultivation technique of soul oracles. To think that the first trial would be learning a cultivation technique. It seems like this fellow is trying to find one with a constitution compatible with the arts of soul oracles. Zhongxian came to a realization. Indeed, being capable of executing the soul-guiding formula would mean that one is compatible with the arts of soul oracle. Possessing a body with such constitution, the other party would be able to resume his cultivation and return to his pinnacle state. One who was adept at swordsmanship would naturally wish to possess a swordmaster. With a constitution suited for sword arts, it would be easier for him to relearn his techniques. As a soul oracle, the other party definitely wished to find someone capable of learning soul oracle cultivation techniques. It would be much easier for him to cultivate this way. Don't bother trying your luck and waiting until the last day before drawing your soul out. It is completely pointless. Whether one has talent in soul oracle arts doesn't depend on how fast one grasps the soul-guiding method. Besides, once you start learning the soul-guiding method, you won't have a choice in the matter. Afraid that the group wouldn't put their effort into learning the soul-guiding method, the voice added. However, before he could finish his words, the impassive voice of a young man voice said, "This soul-guiding method seems not bad. Do you have any other similar cultivation techniques to this? The more there are, the better. Why don't you bring out 1,000 books for me to browse through first?" The voice was taken aback. 1,000 books. Chapter 507, Heaven's Path Soul Art. Not only was the voice stumped, even Hall Master Sai and the others were stunned, and they nearly spurted blood. Bring out 1,000 books for you to browse through first. Why did it feel less like a trial and more like ordering dishes in a restaurant instead? I don't know whether the food will be delicious or not, so I'll take a serving first. The soul-guiding formula is the foundation art of soul oracles. There is only one formula and cultivation technique manual. After a moment of silence, the soul oracle hiding in the darkness finally harumphed coldly. It is the only one. Zhongxian frowned. That's right. All soul oracles cultivate via this method, there are no other alternatives. After which, the voice continued, begin cultivating now. You will only be considered to have cleared the trial if you draw out your soul within 10 days. All right. Knowing that there should be no other traps involved since the other party was conducting a trial, the group walked out from the passageway toward the stone tablet. Zhongxian had no idea who inscribed the tablet, but it had a bizarre beauty to it. Just by looking at the characters, one would feel tranquil. He's probably really a 6-star soul oracle. This was already equivalent to a 5th-level painting. Most probably, the soul oracle who inscribed the stone tablet had a deep understanding into the study of souls. There was a high chance that what Luozhu said was true. The fellow who was speaking to them from the dark was a 6-star soul oracle. He lightly brushed his finger over the stone tablet. Who? A corresponding book appeared in the Library of Heaven's Path. Soul Guiding Formula, the Foundation Art of Soul Oracles. Created by the first soul oracle, Liu Mozi, it can separate one's soul from one's physical body. Flaws. Written on the first page was an introduction to the soul guiding formula, followed by the flaws. There's only 10 flaws, that's not too bad. Casually flipping through it, Zhongxian realized that there were only 10 flaws in the cultivation technique. Most of the cultivation techniques that Zhongxian seen before had from a few hundred to more than 1,000 flaws. This showed that throughout the course of the inheritance of the soul-guiding formula, it had been refined continuously and it was gradually approaching perfection. It was no wonder that this fellow said there was only a set of foundation formula. It was already incredible that there could be such a cultivation technique like this that was so close to perfection. For a second one like this to appear was nearly impossible. There was only a single heaven's path, and the fewer mistakes there were, the closer one was to the truth. It was hard to find another one different from it. Let me see what flaws are there first. Zhongxian lowered his head to take a look. Number 1, upon successfully mastering the formula, one's cultivation will be conjoined onto one's soul, turning one's physical body into an empty shell. On top of that, the compatibility between one's soul and body will deteriorate. Even though one will look no different from a normal person, one would be actually driving the body using one's soul. After reading the first flaw, Zhongxian's complexion turned awful. Going by what was said above, if he were to successfully draw his soul out, it would be equivalent to tearing his soul and body apart. Even if he were to continue driving his own body, it would be, in truth, no different from driving a puppet. Other than the soul oracle cultivation technique, he would be unable to cultivate any other normal cultivation technique. It was just like driving a car. After mastering the soul-guiding technique, one's physical body would become the car whereas one's soul would become the driver. No matter how good one's driving skill was, it was impossible to reach the same level of control as moving one's own body. In other words, once he successfully draws out his soul, it would be equivalent to giving up on his own physical body and his past cultivation. In the future, even if he could live on for an eternity through possessing others, he would also become an unnatural being that had to live in the shadows. Zhongxian was originally thinking of learning the techniques of the occupation, but after reading that first flaw, he immediately lost his interest. Browsing on. Soon, he finished looking through all 10 of the flaws and gained a perfect understanding of the soul-guiding formula. If I cultivate according to this formula and succeed, I'll become a monster. But if I don't, there's a high chance I might be killed by that fellow. Zhongxian frowned previously, as he didn't understand soul oracles, he didn't think much of them. However, after knowing that the cultivation method was filled with such fatal flaws, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Putting aside how his Heaven's Path divine art was paralleled and he would stand the top of the world as long as he cultivates accordingly, just the fact that his soul and body would be separate entities, making him no different from a monster, was already something he wished not. Besides, he was afflicted with the innate fetal poison. As long as he didn't reach the level of a 9-star master teacher by 30, even if he were to become just a soul, he would still die. The innate fetal poison was something that even Kong Shi was unable to find a solution for. If becoming a soul oracle could really fix that problem, the latter wouldn't have had to go to the extent of diving into the deep oceans, stepping onto the treacherous plains, and entering into underground chambers, putting himself in so much danger just to raise his cultivation swiftly. This technique shouldn't be cultivated, but I don't have a choice right now. The person hiding in the dark was at least a 6-star soul oracle, a being far beyond their means. Besides, even if they had sufficient strength to deal with him, the other party could still easily kill them via the mechanical traps installed all around the hall. If he cultivated the soul-guiding formula, it would be impossible for him to remain as a master teacher, and by 30-year-old, the innate fetal poison would take effect and he would die. But if he didn't cultivate, he would be killed by the other party. It was certain doom regardless of whether he did it or not. He felt so frustrated that his head was aching. Ahem. If I find a way to improve the soul-guiding formula so that the soul and body and separate and fuse back perfectly together, won't the problem be solved? After contemplating for a moment, Zhongxian's eyes lit up and a thought popped into his head. There were flaws in this soul-guiding art, but as long as he filled up the gaps and created a perfect Heaven's Path cultivation technique, wouldn't he be able to cultivate it without incurring such problems? Heaven's Path cultivation techniques were perfect. As long as he could compile one out, he wouldn't face the problem of an incompatibility between his soul and body after drawing his soul out. But where can I find additional soul oracle cultivation techniques to make up for those flaws? Zhong Xian frowned. Soul oracle cultivation techniques were mainly centered around will and soul. The cultivation technique manuals that Zhong Xian had collected before were all revolving around physical body and zhenqi. They were both very different things, and he wouldn't be able to form a Heaven's Path cultivation technique even if he were to put it together. Only by finding more soul oracle cultivation techniques would he be able to perfect the soul-guiding formula. But the lineage of the soul oracles had already disappeared for innumerable years, and the fellow hiding in the dark didn't have any more of such manuals. Just as Zhong Xian was in dilemma, a thought suddenly struck him and he slapped his forehead. Chem. Why do I have to look for soul oracle cultivation techniques? Actually, wouldn't cultivation techniques that are beneficial to the soul work as well? He had been going down the wrong path previously. In the end, soul oracles were just individuals who learned a unique soul-related cultivation technique. Their aim was to gain the ability to transfuse their soul into another individual and possess their body to achieve the goal of immortality. Even though Zhong Xian was unable to find any soul oracle cultivation techniques, he had a bunch of soul cultivation techniques in his arsenal. In his journey from Tianqian Kingdom, all the libraries that he visited would have several books concerning the psyche and the soul. Even though they were foundation manuals, and there wasn't much benefit from cultivating them, he had a huge mountain of them. These manuals were useless to him previously, but if he were to compile them along with this soul-guiding art, what would happen? With fiery eyes, Zhong Xian chuckled lightly as he willed. Soul cultivation technique and psyche cultivation technique manuals. Voila! All of the related books immediately appeared before Zhong Xian. There was a huge quantity of them, and placed side by side, they could easily fill up 10 of the humongous bookshelves within the library of Heaven's Path. Making a rough estimation, there were at least a few dozen thousand of them. The psyche and the soul were also important to a cultivator, and as such, there were quite a lot of cultivation techniques on them as well. However, they were much cruder compared to the soul-guiding formula. Most of them were about putting one through hardship so as to build one's mental fortitude. Compile. Zhong Xian muttered. Hula. The several dozen thousand books immediately fused together to form a single book. Zhong Xian hurriedly grabbed it and opened it up. The soul of a human is incomparably profound and mystical. It can be cultivated along with one's body, and it can also be drawn out individually. The body and the soul are two separate entities, and yet, they form a single whole. A new cultivation method was detailed in the book. Swiftly looking through it, Zhong Xian's breathing hastened and his eyes gleamed in excitement. As expected. There were no flaws. A Heaven's Path cultivation technique, compiling the soul oracle's soul-guiding formula along with the psyche and soul cultivation techniques of ordinary cultivators would actually create a perfect cultivation technique. The issue of incompatibility between one's soul and body would become non-existent. In other words, cultivating this technique, one could become a soul oracle. However, one wouldn't be bound by the limitations of soul oracles. One's soul would still be able to fuse perfectly with one's body, and one would still be able to cultivate like an ordinary cultivator. All of the flaws from before had been perfectly solved. Great. Time to cultivate. Even though it sounded complicated, all of this only happened in a few breaths. After swiftly memorizing the soul-guiding formula, Zhong Xian gathered his concentration and started to cultivate. The energy in his body flurried as he gradually drew his soul out from his body. Heaven's Path soul art was just a technique to draw one's soul out from one's body. There was no need to absorb spiritual energy or utilize external tools such as spirit stones or that sort. As such, its cultivation was exceedingly easy. Jeji. Jeji. It felt as though he was forcing something out from his body, and yet at the same time, it felt as though he was leaping off a tall cliff. For a moment, he seemed to have lost control of himself. Wang. The world before him immediately changed. When Zhongxian finally regained his composure, he saw another him standing quietly before him. On the other hand, he was floating lightly in the air. His soul had successfully left his body. As expected of a Heaven's Path cultivation technique, it didn't take him too long to successfully cultivate the Heaven's Path soul art. Looking around the surroundings, Zhongxian tried to see if he could sense the soul oracle's presence, but to no avail. It seemed like that fellow was hiding in a secure location. Otherwise, it was impossible for even the eye of insight to be unable to detect him. Who? He returned to his body. His vision suddenly turned dark and he staggered. Even though his soul didn't leave his body for too long, he still felt extreme fatigue. Only after circulating his Heaven's Path Zhenqi around his body did he recover slightly. Opening his eyes once more, he saw Zhao Yue and the others gathering around him with worried eyes. "Teacher, are you all right?" They had just barely finished reading through the soul-guiding formula, and before they had the time to fully comprehend the essence of it, they saw their teacher stumble, so they immediately rushed forward worriedly. "I'm fine." Zhongxian chuckled. However, a doubt suddenly rose in his mind. When his soul left his body previously, that soul oracle should have noticed something. If so, why wasn't he reacting? Could it be that a soul drawn using the Heaven's Path soul art was different from that of a soul oracle's? That's why he didn't notice anything. Let me give it a try. Zhongxian's eyes gleamed and the edges of his lips curled up. Facing the crowd, he waved his hands. "Everyone, don't cultivate the technique first. I've looked through the formula and I realized that it's impossible for one to successfully draw out one's soul using this. I think he's trying to dupe us by giving us a bogus cultivation technique." Bogus cultivation technique? Ridiculous. Hearing those words, a cold voice boomed across the hall. Chapter 508. I can teach you. The crowd didn't expect Zhongshe to say such words, and they were perplexed. Ridiculous? Zhongxian shook his head. Look at this verse: diffusing the zhenqi throughout one's body into the various acupoints to augment the materialization of the soul. Under normal circumstances, a cultivator would gather the zhenqi from the acupoints into the dantian so as to store, accumulate, and utilize it. However, this verse is telling one to dissipate their zhenqi. That's no different from crippling one's own cultivation. If one were to really do so, how are they to advance their cultivation in the future? Even if they were originally powerful, if they were to cultivate using this formula, they would only grow weaker and weaker. Everyone was stunned. It was normal for zhenqi to flow to and fro from the acupoint and dantian. Only through this would a cultivator's body and soul be nourished and grow stronger. But why did Zhongxian speak as though it was crippling one's cultivation? Now that you speak of it, it does seem a bit like crippling one's cultivation. After a moment of silence, Hall Master Sai finally spoke up. Even though it was normal for one to diffuse one's zhenqi across the acupoints in his body, if one were to do it at a rapid rate, it would be the method to crippling one's cultivation. My words aren't wrong, are they? Seeing that someone was agreeing with him, Zhongxian nodded his head in satisfaction. You are trying to have us slowly dissipate our own cultivation so as to get rid of us in one go. The Library of Heaven's Path detailed the various flaws of the soul-guiding formula. All Zhongxian had to do was to state a few. That voice harumphed. Nonsense. Only by diffusing one's zhenqi to the various acupoints will one be able to protect one's soul with zhenqi so that it can exist out of the body. Otherwise, given how none of you have reached consonant spirit realm, your souls won't be able to move around independently, considering how limited your soul energy is. Upon reaching transcendent mortal 5-dan consonant spirit realm, one's soul energy would be significantly boosted, allowing even an ordinary cultivator to be able to draw his soul out of his body. However, given that their cultivation didn't allow for it yet, they could only guard their own souls with zhenqi. Why did the other party speak as though it was a cultivation crippling technique? Protecting one's soul with zhenqi? You sure know how to phrase your words. Fine, let me ask you then. What does one's zhenqi gushing out of the Huishan acupoint mean? The Huishan acupoint is the area where one's spirit is concentrated. If zhenqi were to gush out of this area, it could potentially result in death. If I'm not mistaken, if one were to cultivate using this formula, Even if one manages to draw one's soul out of one's body would suffer tremendous damage or even die. Zhong Xian said. The voice fell silent. One of the most important aspects of drawing one's soul out of one's body was the death of one's physical body. Only then would one's soul be free from its physical restraint to wander around freely. But of course, as long as the soul were to return to the physical body, one's heartbeat would resume and one would be resurrected. Not allowing the other party to continue speaking, Zhong Xian harumphed and continued. Taking me for example, with my cultivation of transcendent mortal wondan, even if I were to successfully draw my soul out, the compatibility between my body and soul would deteriorate. If I'm not mistaken, to sustain my appearance as an ordinary human on the surface, I would have to consume pills every day. Am I right? Even if it was just a temporary separation between one's body and soul, after the body experienced a temporary state of pseudo-death, the compatibility between one's body and soul would deteriorate. Without pills to sustain oneself, it was just a matter of time before one's bodily functions deteriorated, and death marks started appearing on one's body. It was just like how organ transplants in his previous life worked. Once one donated one's own organ, even if one were to receive it back, one's own body would still reject it. Without medicine to sustain oneself, it would just be a matter of time before it was spoiled. How did you know? The voice was stunned. This was a secret among soul oracles, and they made sure never to let outsiders learn of it. How in the world did this young man learn of it? It doesn't matter whether how I learned of it. While it's true that reaching consonant spirit realm can help to alleviate the damage caused by the soul guiding formula, even for one as strong as you, do you dare to walk in the midst of a storm? Zhong Xian continued. The voice quivered. Souls were of yin attribute, whereas lightning was a highly yang attribute natural phenomenon. Even if a soul oracle was hiding within a body, they would still have to retreat before lightning. They would no longer be able to live life as an ordinary human. Similar to the issue of one being rejected by his own body, this was a highly guarded secret of soul oracles. For that fellow to deduce so much with just a glance at the soul-guiding formula. Are you for real? Knowing that it was impossible for the flaws recorded in the Library of Heaven's Path to be wrong, Zhong Xian chuckled. Placing his hands behind his back, he walked up to the tablet and spoke slowly, putting aside lightning. Let's talk about the onset of the night, a daily occurrence. Every day, at Z hour, 23 to 1 o'clock, when the yin energy is the most concentrated, when yin energy seeps into your body, do you feel an unbearable itch plaguing you, and only by drawing one's soul out is the itch alleviated? Soul oracles don't rely on a physical body for their strength. So what if one's physical body is in discomfort? As long as one's soul remains fine, that isn't a trouble at all. Stumped once more, the voice harumphed coldly. You're right. The soul oracle's greatest strength is their soul. Even if their physical body is ruined, it isn't a huge deal for them. They can simply possess another one and through such, live on in perpetuity. However, without the protection of a physical body, can you really survive? The 5 soul declines? Lifting his fingers, Zhong Xian named, possession decline, senescence decline, combat decline, searing yang decline, and the most fearsome of all, sense decline. You actually know of the 5 soul declines? The voice was no longer able to retain its calmness. Possession decline refers to the natural decline of strength when possessing the body of another. Even at minimum, it would cause a drop of 2 whole cultivation realms. As such, unless truly required, a soul oracle won't possess anybody. Senescence decline refers to the irreconcilable conflict between one's soul and physical body. This will cause one's soul to slowly deteriorate with time. In order to maintain one's strength, one can only continue cultivating frenziedly. Combat decline refers to how one's cultivation would decline when using soul energy to fight. As such, what soul oracles specialize in is beguiling souls and creating fearsome mirages. In truth, soul oracles rarely fight squarely. Searing yang decline. Just as said before, soul oracles don't dare to come into contact with elements that are rich in yang energy. Just by coming into proximity with such objects can cause your soul to weaken. While the first 4 declines are troublesome, they are still avoidable. What is the most fearsome of them all is the fifth one. Senses decline. A human possesses 5 senses and 6 perceptions. They are able to perceive shame, distinguish right from wrong, and comprehend pride and honor. However, souls are incapable of housing these. The more intense the emotion, the greater to the damage to one's soul. A soul oracle's emotion would cause huge ripples in their soul, resulting in their soul energy dissipating automatically. Chuckling softly, Zhongxian raised his eyelids and asked, "Is there any mistake in what I've said?" Terrified, the voice stuttered, "Why you? The heaven is fair." Soul oracles were able to live a significantly longer lifespan than their peers, but in exchange, they had to suffer pain unimaginable by others. They were bound by innumerable restrictions. They weren't permitted to love or hate, and they were confined to remaining only within the shadows. Just that, the 5 soul declines was a classified secret among the soul oracles. Even the master teacher Pavilion failed to uncover this matter back then. So how in the world did this fellow learn of it? Was it because of the soul guiding formula? If that was really the case, wasn't his understanding of cultivation techniques a little, no, way too deep? After recovering from his shock, the voice harumphed. There's no need to talk so much. All cultivators, regardless of whether they are a soul oracle or not, are fighting against the heavens, so how can their lives possibly be smooth sailing? Soul oracles experience the 5 soul declines, but normal cultivators also experience the 5 ordeals: heaven, earth, human, wealth, and law. Since it is impossible to avoid suffering, one should just become a soul oracle and enjoy an unlimited lifespan. There was no cultivator whose safety was guaranteed. Crises revolved around the life of cultivator, be it from nature or other cultivators. Suffering and death were unavoidable. Someone had once made an estimate. Out of 1,000 cultivators, at least 999 would die on the journey to reaching transcendent mortal pinnacle. It was, in the truest sense, 1 in 1,000. Even though the presence of the Master Teacher Pavilion had significantly reduced wars throughout the continent, there were still powers vying with one another for influence, cultivators fighting with one another for valuable artifacts, one's cultivation going berserk. These were all ordeals that cultivators had to face, and many had died in the midst of these struggles. Unlimited lifespan? Are you sure that a soul oracle's lifespan is unlimited? Zhongxian shook his head. Even if one can avoid senescence decline by cultivating non-stop, are you sure that one can really stand this kind of suffering? If I'm not mistaken, your physical body has already decomposed entirely. Without a physical body to protect your soul, even though you're still sustaining your existence, you are undergoing immense anguish every single day. Putting everything aside, just talking about noon every day, when yang energy in the air is the most concentrated, are you sure you can get used to that sharp piercing pain on your soul? If not for this tomb being hidden deep beneath the lake, do you think that a soul like you have been able to survive until now? Why you? Hearing those words, the voice was no longer able to suppress his fear. His voice quivered even more vigorously. The other party was right. A soul could continue on for an eternity, but a body couldn't. Even when hiding in the darkest corner in the world, a soul without a body would still undergo tremendous pain at noon every day, making one wish that one was dead. In fact, the other party had thought of death innumerable times. However, as a soul, physical damage was ineffective against him as he wasn't able to kill himself. In the end, he could only continue living on in such a wretched manner. So, tell me, is there a problem with this cultivation technique? Is it worth learning it? Hearing that the voice had lost its composure, Zhongxian pushed on. There's indeed a problem with it, but what kind of cultivation technique can be flawless? The voice screamed hoarsely. You're wrong. Look at this verse devoid of thoughts: guide one's soul around the Tianzhu acupoint and leave via the Huishan acupoint. If it were to be changed to gather one's soul, break through the Huishan acupoint and escape through the Tianzhu acupoint. What do you think would happen? Asked Zhongxian. The Tianzhu acupoint possesses a yang attribute, whereas the Huishan acupoint possesses a yin attribute. Naturally, a soul is of yin attribute and as such, it won't be affected by yin energy. Through this method, one can minimize the effect of searing yang decline or even completely nullify it. The owner of the voice was a soul oracle expert who had immersed himself in the study of souls for innumerable years. After hearing the new formula that Zhongxian proposed, he began muttering and all of a sudden, he froze. The other party had only changed a few words, but this had changed the essence of the technique. Through using one's internal yang energy to nourish one's soul, one could reduce the effects of searing yang decline or even completely nullify it. It was just altering the sequence of the two acupoints, but it had further refined the soul-guiding formula, bringing it a significant distance closer to perfection. But if you were to change it like that, there would be a high requirement on the quality of one's zhenqi. Otherwise, given how narrow one's huishan acupoint with, a soul wrapped with zhenqi will surely be unable to pass through. After a moment of contemplation, the voice eventually deduced that it was impossible. Before drawing one's soul out of one's body, one had to wrap his soul with zhenqi first. If one's zhenqi wasn't pure enough, the impurities contained within would prevent one's soul from passing through the huishan acupoint. Zhao Ya, display your zhenqi to him. Instead of answering him, Zhongxian turned around and instructed. Yes, teacher. Stepping forward, Zhao Ya pointed his finger forward and a surge of zhenqi gushed out. This. Sensing the purity of the zhenqi, the voice trembled. Do you think it can pass through the huishan acupoint? Zhongxian chuckled. It can, but not everyone's zhenqi can be as pure as hers. The voice sounded slightly low. That's not a problem. Do you wish to learn it? Acknowledge me as your teacher then. Zhongxian chuckled. I can teach you. Chapter 509, The Deceived Soul Oracle Pu. Hearing those words, Zhao Feiwu, Hall Master Han, and the others nearly coughed up a mouthful of blood. Aren't we in danger? Isn't the other party threatening to kill us? Soul oracles, as one of the most sinister occupation in the ancient times, are even more feared than poison masters. Not to mention, the other party is significantly stronger than them, possibly even reaching the zenith of transcendent mortal realm. How did it suddenly turn out that you are going to accept the other party as your student? Can it get even more exaggerated than this? Even though you are a master teacher, you have only barely stepped into the transcendent mortal realm. On the other hand, the other party is a transcendent mortal pinnacle expert. The gap between the two of you is immeasurable. Aren't you afraid of being killed for saying such words? Luo Zhu widened his eyes in shock. When this Zhongshe first came to the Soul Oracle tomb, he didn't know anything about the occupation at all. However, just by glancing at the soul-guiding formula, he immediately learned about the 5 soul declines and even found a way to solve it. It is no wonder why even the heaven acknowledges you. Your strength is truly fearsome. Sun Qiong and the others were also awed. As expected of young master, he is indeed as incredible as always. It doesn't matter whether the other party is a 6-star soul oracle or a transcendent mortal pinnacle expert, all have to bow before him. Acknowledge you as my teacher. The owner of the voice also seemed a little flabbergasted. As a 6-star oracle, a being whose cultivation has reached transcendent mortal pinnacle, how can I acknowledge you, a transcendent mortal one-done ant, as my teacher? You must be pulling my leg. Audacious. Infuriated, his voice became sharp and piercing. Catcher. The sound of the mechanical trap whirring into operation sounded, and a gleam of light suddenly shot toward Zhongxian, as though trying to teach him a lesson for his rudeness. Who? However, before it could even reach him, Zhongxian had already stepped away, dodging the sword qi easily. No matter how formidable a mechanical trap was, it was inflexible. By using the Eye of Insight, Zhongxian could make judgments beforehand and dodge assaults easily with the Heaven's Path movement art. It wouldn't be easy to hit him. There's no need to waste your efforts. If you were to make a move yourself, you might still be able to injure me. Mechanical traps. You should just drop this ludicrous idea. The trap at the entrance was stopped by me. Do you think that these things will be useful against me? Zhongxian said impassively. Compete. The voice harumphed furiously. Even though the mechanical trap at the entrance was powerful, the young man still managed to stop it with a single kick. No matter how powerful his mechanical trap here was, it was truly unlikely for him to be able to injure the other party. Thinking so, the owner of the voice fell silent. The mechanical traps also stopped their operation. Even though the mechanical trap was powered by the kinetic energy of the waterfall, there was still a limit to its ammunition. Seeing that the other party had dropped the idea of resorting to the mechanical traps, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief within. Regarding the traps, if he had to come into direct contact with it before he could form a book, learn of its flaws, and deal with it. However, there were many mechanical traps scattered around the room, and Zhongxian had no idea where they were as well. He might be able to dodge one, but if the other party were to attempt to launch all of the traps at once, given Zhongxian's limited capability, it would be impossible for him to get away unscathed. In truth, the words he had just spoken were mostly a lie. He didn't really expect to succeed. Facing this kind of hidden adversary, he had to use his words to outwit the other party. It's such a pity. Even though the other party had stopped his assault, Zhongxian had no intentions to stopping here. Shaking his head, he sighed in dismay. It's such a good opportunity, but you simply let it slip past you. Sigh, you are indeed such a soul, brainless. You. Hearing those words, the voice nearly spurted blood from frustration and died on the spot. The heck? I am a 6-star soul oracle. Who do you think you are speaking like that to? Putting aside how you are only a transcendent mortal 1 Dan cultivator, even a transcendent mortal 4 Dan would have to tremble before me. Yet, how dare you dream of taking me in as your student, even going to the extent of calling me brainless? You are the one who is brainless. Your entire family is brainless. Don't think that I'll restrain myself just because I intend to possess one of you. If you are that intent to die, I don't mind granting your wish at this instant. The voice was laced with threat. Kill me. Do you dare? With a look of disdain, Zhongxian glanced in front and said, besides, you are just a monster who's been dead for innumerable years already. All you have left are your mechanical traps. If you can kill me, you would have done so yourself previously. You wouldn't be threatening me now. You. What you? If you have the capability, come and kill me now. Stop wasting time. Otherwise, hurry up and show us your 3 trials. To think that you are a 6-star soul oracle, how can you be so dumb? Zhongxian sighed. Forget it. Even if you want to acknowledge me as your teacher now, I don't want to accept you anymore. I'm afraid that you'll pull down my reputation. You. The owner of the voice was about to explode. You are scared of your reputation being pulled down if I acknowledge you as my teacher? Can you be any more shameless than that? Seeing that the other party was leaping in anger, Zhongxian continued, why? Has all of your cultivation has gone to your mouth, and you are incapable of fighting anymore? You are seeking death. Seeing Zhongxian's annoying face, the owner of the voice exploded. Hong Long. A violent ripple diffused in the air and an overwhelming might suddenly crushed down on the crowd. The Soul Oracle was initially hesitant to fight for fear of combat decline. However, choking with anger from the words of the young lad before him, he could no longer hold himself back anymore. Hula! A force suddenly crushed on Zhongxian's neck, as though an intangible hand was grabbing onto it, lifting him up. Teacher! Zhongsha! Seeing that the Soul Oracle was provoked into making a move, everyone panicked. They hurriedly rushed forward. You want to kill me? It won't be that easy. Despite being suffocated, Zhongxian didn't panic. Instead, chuckling lightly, he willed and a grey scale-like object appeared before him. Wang. A light buzz. A barrier of light embraced his body. As though coming into contact with burning oil, the hand grabbing onto Zhongxian quickly retracted. 8. The voice yelled in agony. From the looks of it, he seemed to have sustained significant injuries from it. Dragon Scale Amulet. This was the object that he'd obtained at the appraiser hall some time ago. Based on the evaluation of the Library of Heaven's Path, it could ward off the attack of a transcendent mortal 9 Dan expert 3 times. The time had finally come to use it. An amulet only had protective capabilities. However, once activated, it would return the force from the other party's assault back to him in the form of a backlash. This was precisely the reason why Zhongxian intentionally used his words to provoke the other party into action. In any case, he could use this amulet thrice. Furthermore, as long as the fellow remained hidden, everyone else could only be manipulated by him. Thus, Zhongxian decided to lure him out despite the potential risks. Besides, given the age of the tomb, the other party was likely to have been dormant for a significant period of time already. His cultivation would have surely already deteriorated greatly, and in his weakened state, it was impossible for him to break the defense dragon scale amulet. With just a single strike, the other party was already severely injured. Everyone thought that Zhongshe would be doomed given how the powerful Soul Oracle decided to make a move himself. They didn't expect him to possess a tool so strong that it could even injure a 6-star Soul Oracle. As such, they were astonished by the sight. "I will kill you." Severely injured, the Soul Oracle flew into a frenzy. He bellowed furiously as he prepared to launch a second round of attack. "You want to kill me? You might have been able to succeed a moment ago, but now, I'm afraid you don't stand a chance anymore." The barrier of light could be sustained for several breaths. Seeing that it hasn't dissipated yet, Zhongxian charged forward toward the stone tablet. He didn't know where the other party was previously, so there was no way for him to attack the other party at all. However, after the other party had executed a battle technique, not only did the Library of Heaven's Path reflect the other party's flaws, it had even detailed his current location. Hong Long. With the immense might of 200,000 ding, the stone tablet was immediately smashed to smithereens. After smashing the tablet inscribed with the soul-guiding formula, Zhongxian didn't stop. Instead, he continued charging all the way to the coffin. Just as everyone thought that he would forcefully smash open the coffin, the other party's hands swiftly pat on several places over the coffin, his movements so swift that it left after images in its wake. Pa 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 pa. It was a consecutive 16 pats. There was seemingly no specific logic behind his blows, and his strikes weren't heavy either. With such force, he might have been able to break ordinary boulders, but it was completely useless against a coffin that was crafted by a high-ranked blacksmith like this. No one had any idea what he was thinking of. After that, he paused for a moment. Just as everyone was baffled by Zhongshe's actions, the latter suddenly turned around. "Hall Master Sai, your saber." "Saber? All right." Hall Master Sai was taken aback for a moment before registering what Zhongxian said. Flicking his wrist, he took out a saber and threw it to the other party. It was the same one that Zhongxian used back at the Formation Master Guild to carve the formation plate. Grabbing the saber, Zhongxian's aura abruptly changed. A sharp aura suddenly emanated from his body. Voila! The saber fell down with immense might. Boom! As soon as the saber came into contact with the coffin, a loud explosion sounded. It was as though someone had lit an explosive within the coffin, causing the thick coffin lid to blow up and burst into the surroundings. The immense force from the explosion lodged the fragments of the coffin lid onto the tough wall. Shattered by none, the lock of crimson metal, an undisturbed rest for 10 millenniums. This is a crimson metal coffin. Even a transcendent mortal 9 Dan would be helpless before it. For Zhongshe to break it open with a single slash. How is this possible? Upon seeing the sight, while others didn't think much of it, Luo Zhu's body trembled in shock. He was on the verge of going insane. Crimson metal coffin? You mean the crimson metal coffin crafted by 6-star blacksmiths using an alloy of deep ocean metals? Upon seeing Luo Zhu's state, Hall Master Sai fell into a short moment of contemplation when realization suddenly struck him, and his eyes narrowed. Indeed. It's that crimson metal coffin. Luo Zhu nodded his head. Isn't it said that once the coffin is sealed, no one will be able to open it? Why would? Realizing the impossibility of the matter, Hall Master Sai also went into a frenzy. As the head of the Appraiser Hall, he had seen countless invaluable artifacts, and he had heard of many different treasures as well. Generally, coffins could be divided into 9 main grades. Take for example, the 4 coffins at the other chamber are known as Grade 7 Adamantine Coffin, forged using incomparably resilient top-quality metal. Even spirit intermediate tier weapons would find it hard to break it. And above the 9 grades of metal was crimson metal. Crimson metal coffins were crafted by 6-star blacksmith. It was designed such that once it was sealed, no thief below the cultivation of transcendent mortal 9 Dan would be able to break it. Such came the saying shattered by none, the lock of crimson metal, an undisturbed rest for 10 millenniums. In order to not be disturbed after death, many powerful cultivators would specially hire a blacksmith to craft a coffin of that tier for them so as to ensure that their corpses would remain intact and that no petty tomb raiders would be able to disturb their peace. For Zhong Shi to break a coffin that only transcendent mortal pinnacle experts could break, how could they not be astonished? It was already an amazing feat that they didn't faint upon realization. To see through the flaw of the soul-guiding formula with a single look, to injure a 6-star soul oracle, and to break the crimson metal coffin with a single slash. Was this Zhong Shi really just a transcendent mortal one Dan? Chapter 510, 7 Hearts Underworld Lotus. Before the duo could recover from their shock, Zhong Xian's saber continued slashing down and struck a corpse lying in the coffin. Voila! As soon as the corpse came into contact with the saber, it was immediately reduced to dust, scattering into all directions. The body of a transcendent 9 Dan should be as though tough as diamond. How could it possibly be reduced to dust by a single strike of saber chi? When one's cultivation reached transcendent mortal 9 Dan, not only would one's soul energy increase, one's physical body would also become flawless. As though a diamond, it would become impervious to corrosion and no weapon would be able to leave a mark on it. Even after death, considering how the corpse had been protected by a crimson metal coffin all along, it shouldn't have been reduced to dust by a single strike of a transcendent mortal 1 Dan cultivator. Could Zhong Shi's saber art really be that strong? That's not it. While Zhong Shi's saber art and saber chi are strong, he still isn't strong enough to break a crimson metal coffin and reduce the physical body of a transcendent mortal 9 Dan into dust, Jin Songhai said with a grim expression. After consuming a pill, he had recovered significantly from his previous injury. Then what's going on? Let's continue watching first. Zhong Shi will definitely have an explanation for it. Jin Songhai shook his head. Everyone turned their attention to the man in front of them. Zhong Xian didn't stop after dissipating the tomb owner's corpse with a single slash. With a flick of his wrist, he whipped out several silver needles and tossed them into the coffin. As the silver needle shot into the coffin, everyone suddenly heard a piercing scream. What are you doing? It came from the mysterious voice from before. At this moment, the arrogance in that fellow's voice had disappeared altogether, replaced by fear and disbelief. I'm not doing anything much, just digging you up. Chuckling lightly, Zhong Xian slotted his saber deep into the coffin and flicked his saber up. Who? A black lotus appeared before everyone. This lotus was around the size of a palm, and a black aura shrouded its tip. Every single one of its leaves were pierced with silver needles. The silver needles that Zhong Xian shot before were aimed exactly at this flower. To think that such a peculiar lotus would be hiding beneath an indestructible crimson metal coffin in this incredibly deep tomb. Even when seeing it with their own eyes, everyone still took in a deep breath, unable to believe their sight. Who? In truth, it had only been a few breaths since the tomb owner attacked Zhong Xian to when the lotus was unearthed. Only at this instant did the dragon scale amulet's glowing barrier finally disappear. Could this be? Upon seeing the lotus, Luozhu contemplated for a moment when something suddenly struck him. His eyes rapidly narrowed and with a quivering voice, he uttered, 7 Hearts Underworld Lotus. 7 Hearts Underworld Lotus? What is that? Hall Master Sai asked out of curiosity. Even though he was knowledgeable, he wasn't omniscient. Soul Oracle was a mysterious occupation even during the ancient times, and very little was detailed about them. It is said to be an invaluable treasure for soul oracles. It can be used to forge a new physical body, and on top of that, the forged physical body will possess a unique constitution. Luo Zhu explained. Unique constitution? Hall Master Sai widened his eyes in shock. As long as one's unique constitution was activated, one's rate of cultivation would exceed ordinary cultivators by many times. To be able to forge a physical body that possessed a unique constitution. That was way too fearsome. Indeed. However, something seems amiss. A moment later, Luo Zhu hesitated. What's wrong? The 7 Hearts Underworld Lotus survives by absorbing energy. If I'm not mistaken, the corpse of the tomb owner must have been absorbed clean. Otherwise, It's impossible for a transcendent mortal 9-dan corpse to be reduced to dust by Zhongsha's strike, Luo Zhu said. UN. Hall Master Sai nodded in agreement. They had been perplexed over how Zhongshen managed to reduce a transcendent mortal 9-dan corpse into dust with his sword qi. From the looks of it now, this bizarre flower must have sapped the energy remaining within the body dry. Since the transcendent mortal 9-dan corpse had been used to nourish the lotus should have already bloomed and turned into the Tumona's physical body. Why would he still be lying in the coffin, trying to possess us? Luo Zhu finally asked doubtfully. This. Hall Master Sai and the others, realizing the bizarreness of the situation, fell into contemplation. Indeed, if the other party had an invaluable object like the Seven Hearts Underworld Lotus which could serve as his physical body, why would he need to possess others? Not to mention, even going through all of the trouble of having everyone cultivate the soul-guiding formula, wasn't this a completely pointless action? I don't understand it either. However, I think Zhongsha might have the answer. Otherwise, he couldn't have possibly opened the coffin and dug out this lotus, Luo Zhu said. UN. Everyone immediately turned their eyes over to Zhongshen. At the coffin, that voice was still screaming. You let me go. Being dug up, the black lotus screeched in fright. The Tumona who had threatened to kill everyone earlier was hiding inside. It was no wonder that they couldn't find the origin of the voice earlier. Given that the Tumona was hidden in a lotus beneath the coffin, how could they possibly have found him? Let you go. So that you can continue killing us? Zhongshen rolled his eyes. Why you? As long you as let me go, we can talk things through. As a soul oracle, I have accumulated quite a lot of treasures. I can give them all to you. If you desire, this Seven Hearts Underworld Lotus can be yours as well, that voice said anxiously. Give this lotus to me. No thanks. Zhongshen harumphed. Also, you spoke of the treasures you accumulated. Haven't you exchanged all of them into spirit stones to feed this lotus already? How did you know? A frightened voice echoed from within the lotus. How did I know? The dust around the lotus all came from crumbled spirit stones. It's not like I'm blind. Zhongshen shook his head. In truth, it wasn't that the lotus was buried underground. Rather, it was placed with a huge stack of spirit stones. However, after the spiritual energy from those spirit stones were extracted, they became a layer of dust covering the lotus. Zhongshen had once used a spirit-gathering formation to extract spiritual energy from spirit stones, and a large quantity of similar waste product had appeared before. Thus, he was able to recognize it at first sight. Furthermore, this dust was more translucent and paler than the low-tier spirit stones that he used for his training. Most probably, the spirit stones used were at least of middle tier. Judging from the size of the pile, that must be at least a mountain of 10,000 middle-tier spirit stones. Even for a 6-star soul oracle, that should be his entire wealth. Having deduced all of this, how could Zhongshen possibly fall for the other party's lies? Why you? The lotus trembled violently as though it had seen a ghost. It seemed like in all of his clashes with the other party, he hadn't even won once. The other party seemed to be omniscient, knowing every single thing about him. All of you, come over. Ignoring the two Mona's frightened shivering, Zhongshen waved his hands and beckoned the rest of the group over. Only then did the others rush forward. Unable to stand the intrigue any longer, Zhao Feiwu asked, Zhongsha, what is going on? Everyone also stared at Zhongshen with a look of bewilderment. Everything had happened too abruptly. It was just a moment ago that the Tumona was laughing gleefully at controlling everyone's life and death when, in the blink of an eye, he was dug out from the ground. This bizarre turn of events had left everyone completely baffled. What's going on? I think you should be the one to explain. Zhongshen patted the black lotus in front of him. Huala. The black lotus trembled slightly. At this moment, the voice seemed to have turned mute, unable to speak a single word at all. It seemed like being found and pummeled by a transcendent mortal wand and weakling had left it so stifled that it didn't feel like talking at all. Do you think that you have a choice? Seeing that the other party was unwilling to cooperate, Zhongshen lifted his hand and a needle appeared between his fingertips. Then, with a swift movement, The needle impaled a leaf of the lotus. Ah! A cry of agony immediately sounded within the lotus, and the voice hurriedly gave in, I'll speak, I'll speak. The voice sounded much feebler than before. Clearly, the silver needle had struck its vitals, resulting in a tremendous fall in its strength. Let's hurry up and begin then. Plucking out the silver needle, Zhongxian infused Zhenqi into the silver needle once more, causing it to gleam coldly. It seemed that if that fellow were to hesitate for even an instant, the needle would immediately impale the lotus's body. Yes. Terrified by the threat, the lotus trembled and hurriedly spoke, I am a 6-star soul oracle, and my cultivation has reached transcendent mortal 9-dan pinnacle. However, even until the very end, I failed to make the final step. Even though my soul still managed to live on, my physical body reached its limit. At transcendent mortal realm, one's longevity would be increased by 2-fold. However, that would only add up to 200 years. Even those who were blessed with exceptionally long lifespans only managed to reach 300 at maximum. As long as one didn't surpass this realm, one's physical body would be restrained by that limit. This was the way of the world. Even though soul oracles could sustain themselves by possessing others, naturally, their own body was still the most compatible with their soul. It was then that I found this 7 Hearts Underworld Lotus. The voice continued, this item is the greatest treasure for us soul oracles. As long as it matures, it can be molded into a physical body, not to mention, the body would possess a unique constitution. With this, I might just be able to overcome the last hurdle and surpass the transcendent mortal realm. Thus, I began making preparations for my funeral and squandered all my wealth on building a tomb. This is all so that I can focus my efforts on nurturing this lotus. Everyone nodded their heads. In truth, they had been a little intrigued by the existence of this tomb. Since soul oracles were able to possess the body of other cultivators, why would one waste their fortune and effort on building a tomb beneath a river? From the looks of it now, it was all so that he could nurture this lotus without any disturbances. After all, given how rare and valuable the lotus was, it would be disastrous if other soul oracles were to learn of it. Thus, he chose to fake his death. Even though soul oracles were able to achieve immortality via their soul, they were impeded by the 5 soul declines, so it wasn't entirely impossible for a soul oracle to die. Thus, the other soul oracles didn't suspect a thing when he buried himself in his tomb. But if that is the case, why haven't you succeeded yet? Zhongxian asked. Soul oracles had already been destroyed for dozens of millenniums already, so this tomb surely had a longer history than that. Judging from such, the other party should have been done nurturing the lotus by now already. But if that was the case, why was he still in such a state now? After all, if he had succeeded, he would have already molded the lotus into a new body for himself already. Why was he still stuck inside the lotus, unable to leave? Hearing the question, the voice hesitated for a moment before replying, after the tomb was built, I faked my death and began nurturing this lotus. I thought that, given my strength and experience, I'd be able to succeed swiftly. However, I never thought that I would actually fail. Fail? Zhongxian was perplexed. Since you went to the extent of faking your death, you must know the method to nurturing this lotus. How did you fail? That fellow had prepared for this matter over such a long time, converting all of his possession into spirit stones and burying himself underground, even going to the extent of finding a celestial designer to build the tomb and a 6-star craftsman to forge the coffin. With such thorough preparations, how did the other party fail? That's because. The tomb owner's voice trembled, as though recalling something fearsome. This isn't a 7 Hearts Underworld Lotus but a 9 Hearts Lotus. Chapter 511, The Truth of the Incident 9 Hearts Lotus. This time, not only did Zhongxian frown in confusion, even Luozhu was perplexed as well. He hadn't heard of this name. That's right. 7 Hearts Lotus is known as a sacred object capable of being molded into a physical body, but the 9 Hearts Lotus is an object that has never appeared in the Master-Teacher continent before. If a tier must really be assigned to it, then it can surely be considered as a god artifact, the tomb owner said. God artifact? Hearing those words, everyone froze. Just like cultivation techniques, artifacts and tools could be classified by the ranking god, saint, spirit, phantom, and mortal. Saint artifacts were something that couldn't be found even if one were to ransack the entire Myriad Kingdom Alliance. As for god artifacts, they were things that belonged only to the legends only. It was a mystery as to whether they existed on the Master-Teacher continent or not. Yet, this black object was actually an artifact of that tier? That was way too fearsome. One must know that even Kongsha failed to obtain any god artifacts back then. Given my cultivation, how can I possibly succeed in nurturing a god artifact? Not only were all of my possessions sucked dry, my soul was even imprisoned in this lotus for dozens of millenniums. At this, the tomb owner suddenly sounded extremely depressed. It was no wonder why he was down. After all, he had expected to achieve great things after molding himself a new body. How could he have known that not only would he fail, he would even end up being imprisoned within the lotus, devoid of even the choice of terminating his own life? It already took a miracle for him to retain his sanity until now. Ordinary humans would have long succumbed to the despair already. To be able to hang on until now, the other party's mental fortitude was indeed extraordinary. So, you intended to have one of us replace you so that you could regain your freedom? Zhong Xian asked. That's right, the tomb owner replied. After being trapped for dozens of millenniums, all that is left on my mind is how I can escape from the demonic grasp of this wretched plant. After a very long time, I finally came up with an idea. Since the Nine Hearts Lotus didn't devour me after such a long period of time, it could only mean that it doesn't possess the ability to do so. Thus, if I can find another soul to replace me, I just might be able to escape. In other words, the tomb owner intended to find a scapegoat. All the Nine Hearts Lotus wanted was a soul. As long as he could find another soul to replace him, he would be able to escape from this abyss. After deciding on this, I began trying my best to divide my own soul. After many years of hard work, I finally managed to divide a small part of myself. However, its cultivation is only at Transcendent Mortal 3 Dan. With such weak cultivation, it is unlikely for it to live for too long before it is consumed by senescence decline. Who could have known that at this moment, a tomb raider would arrive? Taken aback, everyone immediately turned their gazes to Luo Zhu. The latter's face reddened. Having his identity exposed in public, he felt a little embarrassed. After all, this occupation wasn't a glorious one. It was no different from a petty thief or burglar. Thus, I formulated a bold plan. I would make the entrance traps slightly easier so that the tomb raider could enter successfully. After which, I would find an opportunity to possess him. The tomb owner continued, in the end, I really succeeded. Terrified, that fellow quickly left this area. Initially, my idea was very simple. After possessing him, I would make use of the soulless metal humanoid to attract more people here before choosing a suitable soul among them to replace me. However, I never expected his soul to be so strong. Not to mention, after the possession, my cultivation had been significantly weakened. Thus, I ended up in a standstill with him, and eventually, I even got killed by a weak, plump man. At which, the lotus trembled with deep resentment. Cough cough. The weak plump man scratched his head awkwardly. Back then, he only managed to devour the soul that tried to possess him due to the Heaven's Path Shanqi in his body. In comparison to the other party, his cultivation indeed didn't mean much. At this point, everyone finally understood the entire situation. This explained why Luo Zhu was able to enter and escape the tomb despite the presence of such a formidable soul oracle here. It turned out that the other party had intentionally allowed him to leave just to attract even more people here. The plan was indeed feasible, just that he didn't expect to meet a monster like Zhong Xian. The soul that took him innumerable years to divide out was cleanly wiped away. Wait a moment. Zhong Xian frowned and waved his hands. Since you were able to sever a part of your soul and send it out from the lotus, why do you still need to lure more people here? Since the fellow's main goal was to leave the lotus, severing a part of his soul should do the job as well. There was no need to go through so much trouble to lure so many people here. After all, he would be putting himself at risk by bringing publicity to the tomb. Since the divided soul was also a part of him, it carried his thoughts and consciousness as well. The main issue he had at hand should have been solved. You're right. However, that soul was severely damaged when I tried to push it out from the lotus. As such, it wasn't going to survive for long. Besides, that doesn't solve the root of the problem. The main bulk of my soul would still continue to suffer here. The only way for me to free myself completely from this lotus is to have another soul take my place, the two-moner said. Then, why didn't you just bewitch Luo Zhu to replace you? What if he'd left for good? Zhong Xian continued to ask. It wasn't easy for Luo Zhu to appear after countless years of waiting. How could the two-moner be so certain that Luo Zhu would bring people here? Wouldn't it have been easier to just have the other party replace him first? Tomb raiders are of yin nature. Such people will never be able to cultivate the soul-guiding formula, the two-moner replied. Besides, look at his age. He's already got 1 foot in the grave. Besides, his cultivation is sorely lacking. What use would it be even if I were to possess him? Face death once more? Luo Zhu's face reddened. He didn't expect to be snubbed just like Sun Qiong. Hearing the explanation, Zhong Xian nodded his head in realization. All of the puzzle pieces fit now. Soul oracles suffered from possession decline, and every possession would cause their cultivation to fall steeply once. Since that was the case, they should choose a good body to possess right from the start. Later on, when the soul that I severed was destroyed, I thought that all hope was lost. But you all came. And the rest unfolded as you know, the tomb-owner said. Then, you tried to make us cultivate the soul-guiding formula, and once our soul were out, you were going to use the name of clearing the trial to have our souls come into contact with the lotus. This way, our souls will be drawn in, thus becoming your replacement, Zhong Xian said. That's right. The tomb-owner didn't deny the matter. Only at this instant did everyone realize the entire situation, and cold sweat drenched their back. The other party had said that he wanted to test them, but from the looks of it now, if they were to really cultivate the soul-guiding formula and succeeded in it, their soul would have been imprisoned by this bizarre flower and their body would have been possessed completely. It was fortunate that Zhong Shi caught onto the other party's ploy. Otherwise, the aftermath would have been unimaginable. That's not right. Zhao Feiwu frowned. Given how powerful you are, you could have totally torn our souls from our physical body to feed the lotus, right? The other party was a 6-star soul oracle who could even lay out the oasis of the mirage deity, while even the strongest of their group was only a transcendent mortal 4-dan cultivator. Tearing out their soul from their body shouldn't have been anything hard. Why did he have to go through so much trouble of having everyone cultivate the soul-guiding formula? Allow me to explain this. Zhong Xian glanced at the lotus indifferently and said, it's not that he doesn't want to do it, but he can't. He can't. Everyone was taken aback. There are 2 reasons for this. Firstly, a soul oracle suffers from strength decline, and forcefully using one's soul energy to extract the souls of others would cause immense damage to oneself. Secondly, he has been trapped by the lotus for a very long time, and controlling the traps and attacking me are already the limit of his ability. It is completely impossible for him to fight with us all at once. Otherwise, he would have long made a move already. He wouldn't have to hide himself and resort to all of these traps. Zhong Xian explained. After the other party's attack, a book was compiled by the Library of Heaven's Path. Otherwise, he couldn't have been so brave as to charge forward to dig up the lotus. Trapped by a god artifact, it was already very difficult for the other party to exert energy and force himself out of the lotus. Controlling the traps were already a huge difficulty for him. If he could kill the crowd so easily, he wouldn't have to do things in such a roundabout manner. Hearing Zhong Xian's words, everyone came to a realization. It was no wonder why this soul oracle acted so hesitantly before weaklings like them, choosing to conceal his own presence. It turned out that this fellow was all talk. In truth, he wasn't capable of doing anything to them at all. The tomb-owner also didn't expect that even his weakness would be seen through by this young man, and his eyes were filled with fear and defeat. Initially, he had been thinking that if the other party was unaware of this, he could still use this as a leverage against him. However, even his last hope had been shattered now. On top of that, The other party's silver needles had been pierced into the areas where he could transmit his will out of the lotus from. As such, he couldn't even control the traps now. His life was completely in the hands of the other party now. Now that the mystery had been unraveled and the powerful 6-star soul oracle had been subdued, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Zhongxian turned to the lotus and demanded, "All right, tell us about the dragon severing lock." The entire area had been sealed, and the only way to leave was to break the dragon severing lock. Since this fellow was the one who sealed the place, he had to have a way to leave as well. There's no other exit. The two Mona spoke awkwardly. No other exits? Then how do you intend to leave after possessing one of our bodies? Zhongxian frowned. Since this fellow intended to escape from the lotus, he must have taken into consideration his escape route as well. He couldn't possibly possess another body only to be stopped by his own dragon severing lock. "I can escape using the means of a soul oracle," the tomb owner said. "Means of a soul oracle?" the crowd asked in confusion. "Look on top. At the top of the tomb, there is a mechanism that will open up a path all the way to the surface of the lake when triggered. Soul oracles are able to fly around freely due to their light souls. On the other hand, normal transcendent mortal cultivators are incapable of flight. That's why I told you all, it's futile," the tomb owner said. "Fly." Everyone turned their gazes to the top and saw that there was indeed a portion which seemed a little bizarre. However, given the height of the ceiling, even the transcendent mortal Dan Hall Master Sai would be unable to reach it. Needless to say, escape from this tomb. Chapter 512, Flying? I can do it. Even though transcendent mortals were far stronger than fighters and possessed a significantly greater degree of control over nature, they were still incapable of flight. It was at least 70 to 8 meters from the ground to the mechanism on the ceiling, and the surrounding walls were tough and slippery. It was nigh impossible to climb up. What can we do then? Are we supposed to just die like that in here? Hearing those words, the hope in everyone's hearts extinguished in an instant. Since this fellow had failed to possess any single one of them, naturally, he couldn't use his soul oracle abilities. Besides, even if he could, he wasn't trustworthy. This formed a huge dilemma. If they didn't find a solution, they might just end up being trapped down here for life. How about this? One of you all sacrifice yourself to allow me to possess your body so that I can take all of you out. Otherwise, if this goes on, it's just a matter of time before your rations run out, the tomb owner said. Given that this was an enclosed space, no matter how much sustenance they had, it would just be a matter of time before it ran out. Seeing that the fellow hadn't given up yet, Zhongxian slapped the lotus in displeasure. "Shut up, it's not your place to speak here. You don't need to worry about how we're going to leave here. You currently have two choices before you. You can choose to become my servant and jot down your soul oracle ability down for me. In exchange, I'll find a way to free you from that lotus." "Servant?" The tomb owner was taken aback, and he nearly burst into tears. "Aren't I supposed to acknowledge you as my teacher? The offer has already passed. If you'd agreed just now, not only would I have freed you, I'd even have imparted the complete cultivation technique to you so that you wouldn't need to fear the 5 soul declines. However, it's already too late." Zhongxian waved his hands impatiently. The tomb owner sounded a little constipated, and he was so frustrated that he could die on the spot. That was to be expected. Back then, he'd still possessed the upper hand and had some leverage over the other party. Given the other party's identity as a master teacher, he wouldn't stoop so low as to harm his own student. But now, he was nothing more than a captive. His life and death hinged on a thought of the other party. It was already benevolent of the other party to offer to take him in as his servant. After a moment of silence, the voice helplessly said, "What's the second option?" "I'll slowly interrogate you, and once I get my answers, I'll dispose of you." Zhongxian spoke impassively. He couldn't help but tremble at his words. Even though the other party had spoken calmly, the tomb owner knew that the other party would really do it. "All right, I, Mo Hunsheng, am willing to be Zhongshi's servant." The fellow before him had overcome his assault, saw through his ploy, and even opened up a sealed crimson metal coffin. His means and capability were way off charts. It would probably be a walk in the park for the other party to eradicate him. There was no need to hesitate at all. After living for so many years, he understood the value of life. As long as he could free himself from this wretched lotus, being a servant was the least of his worries. After making up his mind, the tomb owner prepared to speak when the other party's impatient voice sounded. "What are you trying to do?" "I'm making a vow." The tomb owner, Mo Hunshing, replied. "Pa, what's the use of making a vow? Sign a soul contract. Don't tell me that a soul oracle like you doesn't even know something as basic as this." Zhongxian slapped the lotus. "You must be joking. Given the innumerable mysterious means that soul oracles possess, I would be a fool to trust your vow." "Soul contract." The lotus trembled. He was about to go insane. He thought that he could fool the other party with a show, and as soon as he freed himself from his restraints, he could teach the other party a lesson. Yet, who knew that the other party didn't even fall for his trick? A soul contract was something similar to a contract with a tamed beast. Once it was established, one mustn't go against it. Otherwise, one's soul would dissipate. For a transcendent mortal 9-dan expert like him who was just a step away to reaching a whole new realm to sign a contract and become the servant of a transcendent mortal 1-dan cultivator, the more he thought about it, the more frenzied he felt. "Why? Aren't you willing?" Just as he was still feeling conflicted, he felt a silver needle pierce him and a surge of pure zhenqi seared his soul. I agree. It was clear that his life was in the grasp of the other party. Mo Hunshing dared not hesitate any longer. A white light flashed, and a sliver of soul gushed into Zhongxian's head. Soul contract established. All right. Sensing his control over the other party's life and death, Zhongxian knew that the other party had completely submitted to him. Only then did he flick his wrist and put the lotus away into his storage ring. Regardless, this was a god artifact. It might be capable of incredible things, so he decided to study it after they returned. After a moment of hesitation, Zhongxian turned to Hall Master Sai and the others and said, "I hope that everyone here will refrain from spreading news regarding this lotus." Zhao Ya and the others were his students, so they were trustworthy. However, the same could not necessarily be said about the rest of the group. After all, a god artifact was a treasure surpassing that of even saint artifacts. If news of its existence were to leak, Zhongxian would definitely be pursued to the ends of the world. Even if other people didn't dare to attack him in the open for fear of the backlash from the Master-Teacher Pavilion, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't resort to underhanded means. "Zhongshu, rest assured. If I reveal this matter, may the heavens smite me and my soul fall into oblivion." Knowing what the other party was worried about, Hall Master Sai raised his hands and vowed to the heavens. Following which, Zhao Feiwu, Jin Songhai, Jiyu Mu, Luo Zhu, and the others did the same as well. They understood the danger behind carrying something beyond one's means to protect. Zhongxian had taken away the most valuable lotus, whereas Sun Qiong had kept the other coffins in the first chamber. Given that everyone had worked hard in coming here, they couldn't possibly just leave empty-handed. Thus, Zhongxian pointed to the coffins around and offered, "Yuan. Since you've all worked hard in coming here, you can't simply leave empty-handed like that." Those coffins were forged by 6-star blacksmiths, so they could be considered as treasures as well. I believe they should fetch quite a sum. Those were crimson metal coffins forged by 6-star blacksmiths, and they were all extremely resilient. They were of equal quality to spirit pinnacle weapons, even though their utility might not match up to it. If sold, it could definitely fetch a considerable sum. There's no need for it, we ended up contributing nothing at all. "Zhongshu, you're being too polite." Understanding Zhongxian's intentions, the crowd hesitated for a moment before eventually shaking their heads. If not for Zhongshu, they would have surely all died. To take something on top of that, they were too embarrassed to do so. But even though they didn't obtain any treasures, they still managed to obtain a part of the soul-guiding formula. If they were to study it, it could prove to be beneficial to their cultivation. Since you all aren't interested in it, I won't stand on ceremony then. Sun Qiong, collect everything here. Before they could finish turning down the offer, Zhongshu's voice sounded once more. Great. After which, Butler Sun immediately rushed forward excitedly and moved all of the coffins, including the one which Zhongxian had wrecked previously, into his storage ring. The crowd. The person in front of them was obviously such a formidable master teacher, and if he wished for it, everyone would rush forward to fulfill his demands. Yet, he was still such a Scrooge. That coffin had already broken into numerous fragments, and yet he was still collecting all of the pieces, one at a time. If he could, would he go to the extent of even dismantling the mechanical system? Just as they were thinking so, the other party's voice sounded, "Sun Qiong, bring little Mo around and take away all of the traps that can be dug up. Those are good items." The crowd. Cough cough. Zhongshu, it's still too early to be scavenging for treasure. Regardless of whether it is the mechanical traps or the coffin, we have to first be able to get out first. Choking on her saliva, Zhao Feiwu couldn't help but say. The most important issue at hand was neither the revelation of the existence of the lotus or the scavenging of the mechanical traps and coffins. It was to find a way to leave this area. Given that the dragon severing lock was in place, the group couldn't go back the way they'd come from. On top of that, they were incapable of flight as well. If so, how were they supposed to leave here? If they couldn't leave this area, it would be meaningless even if he were to take everything of value here. Get out. Hasn't little Mo spoken about that already? There's a path on top. Zhongxian pointed. Seeing how the other party lack of depth in thoughts, everyone was speechless. Zhao Feiwu rolled her eyes and replied, "But it's so high. We aren't able to fly, so how are we supposed to leave?" "It's just flying," Zhongxian replied nonchalantly. "I can do it." "You can do it?" Shocked, everyone widened their eyes in shock. "Are you for real?" Even a transcendent mortal 9-dan expert was incapable of flight, and yet, you, a transcendent mortal 1-dan cultivator, said that you are able to do it. UN. Nodding his head casually, Zhongxian explained, "It's just an ability of a celestial master teacher, it's nothing much. Just like the lotus, the issue regarding the red dust heaven ascending steps should not be made known to outsiders." However, given the circumstances, Zhongxian couldn't possibly hide his ability of flight any longer. Thus, he decided to attribute the matter to an ability of a celestial master teacher. In any case, celestial master teacher was a completely spontaneous event and not everyone would be able to become one. Even if one was jealous, there was nothing one could do about it. Besides, there had only been one celestial master teacher in the world before Zhongxian, Kongshe. Thus, no one could say for sure whether celestial master teachers were capable of flight or not, and there was no way they could verify it as well. As such, this was the ideal excuse. Just flying. Everyone was on the verge of puking blood. That was flying. It was something that even transcendent mortal 9-dan experts were incapable of. Yet, why do you think of it as easy as though going to the market to buy cabbage? At the same time, they also felt perplexed. Were celestial master teachers really granted the ability of flight as well? But they didn't recall seeing it in any of the books regarding Kongshe. Even so, celestial master teachers were a mysterious existence, and so, no one could say what they were capable of for sure. "Wait here for a moment." Driving his zhengqi, Zhongxian began rising up into the sky, flying swiftly toward the mechanism at the ceiling. Red dust heaven ascending steps, parallel heaven scroll. Back when Zhongxian was at half transcension, he could only sustain himself for a few breaths before falling down. Now that he was at transcendent mortal 1-dan pinnacle, his zhengqi had become purer and thus, the duration he could sustain himself had increased. His limit was currently dozens of breaths. In this short period of time, it was impossible for him to travel a great distance. Even so, opening a tunnel and flying out of it was a simple task. "He's really flying." Seeing Zhongxian floating up, the mouths of the crowd twitched violently. Flight had always been one of the greatest dreams of mankind. Yet, a transcendent mortal 1-dan was currently soaring in the air. This was way too fearsome. It's best not to reveal anything regarding celestial master teachers and soul oracles to anyone else. Zhongshe is a person who will achieve great things in the future. We cannot afford to offend such a person. After a long moment of silence, the same thought appeared in everyone's mind. A hero would eventually shake the world with his name, a dragon would eventually dominate the skies. A person destined for great things could only be befriended. By no means should one ever offend such a person. And Zhongshe was such a person. Chapter 5:13, The Method to Save Lu Chonghu. Ignoring everyone's shock, Zhongxian reached the ceiling and touched the mechanism. Then, his fingers began operating swiftly, tapping on various protrusions on the ceiling. Possessing the library of Heaven's Path, Zhongxian could easily find the flaws within a mechanical trap. It was just like with the crimson metal coffin before. Even though it was known to be unbreakable, in truth, if one were to find the flaws and exploit them, it wouldn't be a problem at all. This mechanism was the same as well. Catcher. After a few taps, a crisp sound echoed and a boulder slowly split open, revealing a passageway. Zhongxian immediately dived into it. The passageway was completely dark. There should be another mechanical system installed above the passageway to prevent the lake water from collapsing in. After walking several dozen meters, he saw a gigantic boulder. As long as he knocked the boulder open, he should be able to return back to the bottom of the lake. Just like with the entrance, there was a unique mechanical system installed here which allowed humans to pass but prevented the lake water from gushing in. Formidable. Taking a brief sweep of the mechanical system, Zhongxian realized that its design wasn't inferior even when compared to formations. He couldn't help but feel awed. As expected of a celestial designer. Some of the systems behind the mechanical traps were so complex that many men wouldn't get it even if they spent their entire life studying them. After recuperating for a moment and recovering from the massive expenditure from the red dust heaven ascending steps, Zhongxian finally returned back to the crowd once more. He took a rope from Luo Zhu and fastened it to the passageway. The group didn't hesitate and hurriedly climbed up. They were all cultivators, so even though they weren't capable of flight, scaling a rope was extremely simple. Swimming up the lake, they finally returned back to the shore. Everything they just went through suddenly felt like an illusion, as though a dream they'd all had. Even though they were only in the Soul Oracle tomb for a short moment, they had been on the verge of death and experienced despair. To think that they would be able to see the surface once more. Thank you, Zhongshe. After drying his clothes with Zhenqi, Hall Master Sai stepped forward and bowed earnestly. As expected of a celestial master teacher. In the face of such danger, unlike the rest of them, he was able to maintain his calmness and use his wits to twist the situation around. Through doing so, he even managed to turn a 6-star soul oracle into his servant. If he hadn't witnessed it with his own eyes, he wouldn't dare believe this to be true. You're being too polite, everyone has worked hard as well. Since we are in no hurry to leave, why don't we rest here for the night? After all that they had gone through, the sun had already set. Stars shone brightly in the sky, and a crescent moon was hanging above the top of the mountain. The atmosphere felt peaceful. There was a slight scent of autumn in the air. Green had faded from the leaves on the trees, turning into a more yellowish shade. A mountain wind blew past, caressing the group with a chilly touch. All right. Hearing that they were in no rush to leave, the crowd heaved a sigh of relief. Their mind had been tense during the entire time in the Soul Oracle tomb, and that had left them in a withered state. They felt even more exhausted than if they had fought an intense battle. This was the demon-sank beast's nest, and there weren't any spirit beasts who would dare to wreak havoc here. Everyone started a campfire and whipped out the food they had stored in their storage ring. Before long, the fragrance of meat began wafting in the air. Zhongxian was also ravenous. While he was in the midst of digging into his food, Wang Ying suddenly walked over and asked concernedly, "Teacher, what's wrong with your neck?" Neck? Taken aback, Zhongxian grabbed the copper mirror that Wang Ying offered him and observed his neck carefully. Below his lower jaw, there was a portion that was slightly gray. Oh, it is caused by Little Mo's Soul Oracle aura. Don't worry, it'll fade away very soon. Back when they were still in the Soul Oracle tomb, in order to bait Mo Hunsheng so as to use the dragon scale amulet against him, he allowed the other party to grab him. It was probably then that the mark was left behind. Even so, it wasn't very conspicuous and one wouldn't notice it unless when paying close attention to it. It was only because of Wang Ying's meticulousness that she noticed it. A soul oracle was a very different life form from a human being, and coming into contact with such a powerful soul oracle, it was perfectly normal for a mark to be left behind. However, it should gradually disappear soon. That's good. Seeing that it wasn't a major issue, Wang Ying heaved a sigh of relief. I need you and Zhao Ya to bring Lu Chong over. Meanwhile, I'll investigate some things, Zhong Xian instructed. Lu Chong didn't come here along with the crowd. Instead, he was placed on the back of Zhao Feiwu's spirit beast. Now that the demon-sank beast was tamed, it posed no threat whatsoever anymore. Thus, it shouldn't be a problem for them to bring him over. Yes. Knowing her teacher's intention to save Lu Chong, Wang Ying nodded her head. After delegating several tasks, Zhong Xian stepped into the demon-sank beast's cave. The cave was wide and clean. Finding himself a quiet place, Zhong Xian took out the 9 hearts lotus. He didn't have any time to ask Mo Hunsheng anything when they were in the tomb previously. Since he had some time now, he could properly question him to see if there was any way to save Lu Chong. Master. Upon leaving the storage ring, Mo Hunsheng immediately realized that he was out of the tomb, and a tinge of excitement could be heard in his tone. After being trapped for several dozen millenniums, he finally managed to see the surface once more. The agitation he was feeling at the moment was unimaginable. As such, his use of master was completely earnest. There wasn't the slightest sarcasm or insincerity in it. I want to know if you have any way of waking a dormant soul, Zhong Xian asked with a grim expression. Wake a dormant soul? Mo Hunsheng was stunned for a moment before replying. To wake a dormant soul, you just have to send your soul into the other party's body to wake him up. It isn't too complicated. Zhong Xian fell into contemplation. In truth, he knew of this method as well. But back then, his soul was still unable to leave his body, so he could only drop the idea. But now everything was different. Having cultivated the Heaven's Path soul art, his soul could already exist separately from his body. He could easily enter the Lu Chong's body to wake up his soul. However, this action is very similar to possession. The slightest mistake might result in you taking over control of the other party's body instead. Bound to Zhong Xian by the soul contract, Mo Hunsheng didn't dare to hide anything from the other party. Sending a soul into another person's body was an action no different from possession. It was still all right if one could wake up the other party, but if it failed, it was very possible that a possession would really take place, and the intruding soul would suffer from possession decline. More importantly, if you fail to wake the other party up, your soul might just be acknowledged by the other party's body. If so, it would be impossible to wake the other party up anymore. Mo Hunsheng hesitated for a moment before continuing. After all, a soul capable of intruding into the body of another has to be incredibly powerful. Furthermore, given that the other party's soul is in a dormant state, he must be completely defenseless at the moment. A body which hasn't been nourished by a soul for a very long time is extremely likely to acknowledge the wrong master. If that happens, not only will you fail to save the other party, you might even directly cause his death. With a grim expression, Zhong Xian clenched his fist tightly. Is there any way to avoid that from happening? Since he was going to make a move, he should ensure that there was 100% chance of success. If he were to fail, how could he face his own conscience? After all, he was the cause of Lu Chong's current plight. If he failed to treat his own student, he should be ashamed of being the other party's teacher. Avoid that from happening. If the other party's soul becomes resilient and powerful, then even if you fail to wake his soul up, he should still be in control of his physical body. At the very least, a possession won't occur. Mo Hunsheng said. The best method is to use soulrouse grass to forge soulrouse incense. If you were to light the incense and allow the person with a dormant soul to breathe it in first, there will be a significantly higher chance of waking him up. Soulrouse grass? Zhong Xian frowned. As an apothecary, he had browsed through many herbology books, but he had never heard of such a medicinal herb before. Soulrouse grass isn't a plant but a unique object bred through the nurturing of a soul oracle's soul, Mo Hunsheng said. How long does it take to grow one? Zhong Xian asked. If it took too long, he would have to resort to other alternative solutions. Not too long, just a month. However, my soul is trapped within the lotus, so I am unable to grow one. Mo Hunsheng smiled bitterly. Even if he wanted to help, trapped in the Nine Hearts lotus, he was completely powerless. Instead of replying the other party's words, Zhongxian asked, "Can all soul oracles nurture one?" "Yes. As long as one is a soul oracle who has succeeded in drawing his soul out, one will be able to nurture it. The method is extremely simple. I'll tell you about it now," Mo Hunsheng said. Zhongxian shook his hands and said calmly, "Yuan, tell me the method." "All right." Thus, Mo Hunsheng began speaking. Very quickly, he explained the entire process for breeding a soul-rouse grass. Just as he'd said, the soul-rouse grass wasn't a specific plant but an object bred through the nurturing of one's soul. Only then would it harmonize with one's soul and achieve the purpose of waking up a soul. It can't be that you're thinking of learning the soul-guiding formula to become a soul oracle and nurture one? Seeing that his master had jotted the cultivation method for the soul-rouse grass down, Mo Hunsheng was taken aback. "That's right." Zhongxian nodded his head. Since this object was useful to Lu Chong, he did have the intention to plant it. "But you're a celestial master teacher." Mo Hunsheng was shocked out of his wits. His master was a talented celestial master teacher. If he were to cultivate the soul-guiding formula, that would be equivalent to giving up his identity. Wasn't that being a little too reckless? "Don't worry, I've already revised the soul-guiding formula. Even if I were to succeed in drawing out my soul, it won't have any adverse effect on my physical body such that my soul will still be able to harmonize perfectly with the body," Zhongxian said calmly. "Revised? Harmonize perfectly?" Within the lotus, Mo Hunsheng's eyes widened into perfect circles and his lips quivered in disbelief. The soul-guiding formula was the cultivation technique that was passed down among soul oracles for innumerable years. Countless experts had revised and improved it, but even so, they were unable to get past this bottleneck. Yet, just by studying the formula for a few breaths, this fellow had actually revised it such that it didn't affect the compatibility between one's body and soul. How was that possible? Just as he was thinking that the other party might be bragging, he saw his master's body suddenly sway and an intangible shadow suddenly appeared above the body. He drew his soul out. The voice trembled. As a 6-star soul oracle, he could clearly see that his master's soul had already separated from his body. "Can you see me?" Just as he was overwhelmed with shock, the other party's soul voice sounded. Then, Zhongxian stepped forward and sat in front of the lotus. "I can see you now." Mo Hunsheng trembled. Zhongxian nodded his head in satisfaction. It seemed like the soul he drew out using the Heaven's Path soul art was similar to his Heaven's Path Shenqi. As long as he willed it to be so, if he wished to conceal his soul, even a higher-ranked soul oracle would be unable to see him. On the other hand, he could also choose to reveal it as well. Who? After confirming this fact, Zhongxian returned back to his physical body. Return of the soul. Perfect consummation, concord of acupoints, harmony of body and soul. Why you really managed to improve the soul-guiding formula. Seeing that Zhongxian's soul had returned back into his body without any problems, and his souls were even calling in harmony, producing a sound reminiscent of the call of a dragon, Mo Hunsheng screeched in shock and he nearly fainted on the spot. Chapter 514. But they are both men. The normal soul-guiding formula would cause one's physical body to decline swiftly as soon as the soul was drawn out of the body. Yet, the person before him was still filled with vitality from head to toe. His acupoints were in concord, and his soul and physical body were in harmony. Not only was he not inferior to any transcendent mortal cultivator, his disposition even seemed more refined. His presence seemed to create immense pressure on other souls. With just a single look, Mo Hunsheng could immediately tell that the soul-guiding formula that the other party cultivated was different from his. It had already been improved such that the concept of 5 soul declines was non-existent. It was at a whole new level. Legend had it that the founding father of soul oracles, Liu Mozi, had stolen the knowledge of souls from the Heaven's Path to create the occupation. However, due to the imperfection of heaven, the content he stole was incomplete, thus resulting in the 5 soul declines and the incompatibility between one's soul and body. The soul oracles in the latter generations tried many means to improve the soul-guiding formula, but to no avail. Yet, the young man before him had only taken a momentary look, and not only did he manage to rid it of all its fatal flaw, he even succeeded in cultivating it. How could he not be surprised? How in the world did you do it? After the shock came deep excitement, a celestial master teacher who is capable of improving the soul-guiding formula. Just his strength and knowledge in itself can probably bring me to greater heights. The reason why he established a soul contract with the other party was out of helplessness before. However, upon seeing the other party's capability and means, he suddenly realized that this might have been the most correct decision in his life. Following such a talented figure, if he were to earn the other party's favor and guidance, he would definitely be able to surpass his previous bottleneck. These are the secret techniques that I have uncovered through my years of research. It might prove useful to master. Thinking so, Mo Hunsheng immediately transmitted his knowledge over via his soul. Soul oracles were capable of transmitting information directly through their souls. This method was much more efficient than reading books or verbal explanation. Due to the contract forming a bridge between them, this transfer of information was exceptionally efficient. Zhongxian felt his eyes blur for a moment when in the next instant, a huge gush of information appeared in his head. They were all regarding soul oracles. Mo Hunsheng was a 6-star soul oracle from the ancient times. Back then, the inheritance hadn't been terminated yet, so the knowledge he knew covered nearly everything regarding the occupation. As expected of a feared occupation, it is indeed deep and profound. After briefly looking through it, Zhongxian's mouth widened in shock. It was no wonder why the lineage of this occupation could be passed down for innumerable generations, even becoming a subject of fear beyond that of poison masters. Soul oracles were indeed not to be trifled with. In comparison to all of this, soul-guiding formula was indeed just the foundation. Suddenly, Zhongxian saw something and turned to the lotus. Did you create this soul-severing technique? That fellow had been trapped in the 9 Hearts lotus for dozens of millenniums, and it was due to his intense desire to escape that he studied this technique for innumerable years so that he could sever a part of his soul to escape from the lotus. I created it through innumerable trial and error. Mo Hunsheng nodded. Using this formula, one can create another of oneself such that even if the main soul is destroyed in the future, one can still maintain his existence through this clone. Clone? Zhongxian was taken aback. That's right. This severed soul is a complete replica of oneself, possessing even one's complete memories. In other words, it's equivalent to creating a spare soul. If you were to meet with danger, this can serve as your trump card, so it isn't too bad, Mo Hunsheng said. Zhongxian nodded his head. He quickly looked through the soul-severing technique. That skill was indeed incredible. Only one who had achieved a profound understanding of souls could create such a skill. From the looks of it, if it wasn't for this fellow being trapped within the 9 Hearts lotus and was unable to cultivate, given his accumulation over a course of several dozen millenniums, he could have been an 8-star of even 9-star soul oracle by now. But that was to be expected. Being trapped during this entire period of time, all he had been focused on was how he could free himself from this hell. If his understanding of souls didn't make any progress, he would truly be a hopeless cause. Let me see how many flaws there are. Submerging his consciousness into his mind, he entered the library of Heaven's Path and imprinted the knowledge which the other party sent him onto blank books. After which, he grabbed the book regarding the soul-severing technique and flipped it open. Soul-severing technique, created by Mo Hunsheng. Upon mastering the technique, one will be able to divide one's soul into 2 flaws. A huge amount of information was detailed on it. Reading through the content, Zhongxian couldn't help but praise, only 120 flaws, that's rather formidable. To create a technique possessing only 100 flaws through one's individual efforts. Even though Mo Hunsheng may seem unreliable, his talent and capability were indeed top-notch. How could a 6-star soul oracle possibly be ordinary anyway? Compile. With a thought, Zhongxian fused all of the books regarding souls together to recompile the soul-severing technique. Taking another look at it once more. There were only 10 flaws or so left in it. Seems like my books regarding souls are still sorely lacking. I should get someone to buy more for me when I arrive at the Myriad Kingdom Alliance. Regarding the soul-severing technique being able to be used as a life preservation method, Zhongxian was rather surprised. It was impossible for any cultivator to completely stay out of harm's way. If he were to successfully cultivate this technique, he would have another ace up his sleeves. However, there were too many flaws with this cultivation technique, so he wasn't interested in it for the moment. Even if he wanted to cultivate it, he would have to collect more books and make up for its deficiencies first. Now, time to look at the 9 Hearts Lotus. Given the humongous quantity of information that the other party sent over, Zhongxian knew that it was impossible for him to look through all of them in just a day or two. Thus, opening his eyes, he turned his attention to the Black Lotus instead. A 6-star soul oracle had called this item a god artifact. Zhongxian was interested to see what effects it had. Thus, coming into contact with it, he muttered flaws. Who? A book appeared in the Library of Heaven's Path. 9 Heavens Lotus Embryo, an object descended from the celestial. It requires the nourishment of the purest energy to grow, and upon mature, it could be used to craft the most perfect physical body. Flaws. Number 1, it has yet to reach maturity, which is indicated by a white outer appearance. So, it's not called 9 Hearts Lotus but 9 Heavens Lotus Embryo. The part regarding it being able to be used to craft physical body turns out to be true. After reading through the first page, Zhongxian nodded his head. From the looks of it, even though Mo Hunsheng had been trapped within the lotus for more than several dozen millenniums, he was still unable to recognize it entirely. 9 Heavens Lotus Embryo. Even though its exact level wasn't stated within the book, it seemed to be a high-tiered object. To think that there would be only 5 flaws. Flipping to the second page, Zhongxian was just about to continue reading when he froze. There were only 2 pages detailing the 5 flaws of the object. This was Zhongxian's first time seeing an object with so few flaws. As expected of a god artifact. With eyes reddened in agitation, a thought suddenly appeared in Zhongxian's mind. If I were to learn the soul-severing technique and create a clone while nurturing this lotus to serve as its body, wouldn't it be equivalent to gaining another life? The more Zhongxian thought of it, the more agitated he felt. If he were to nurture this god artifact which only had 5 flaws to create a clone for himself, wouldn't his fighting prowess immediately soar? It's a pity that I probably won't live to the day that this lotus matures. One of the flaws written in the book was that the 9 Heavens Lotus Embryo had yet to mature. A mature 9 Heavens Lotus Embryo should be completely white, but the lotus was currently pitch black in color. After consuming Mo Hunsheng's entire fortune and living for several dozen millenniums, it was still in this state. Given Zhongxian's lifespan of several hundred years, it would be impossible for him to live until its maturity. It would be impossible to mold it before the lotus reaches maturity. If he were to try it forcefully, he might just end up like Mo Hunsheng, trapped in the lotus and losing his freedom, unable to even end his own life. Thinking so, a thought suddenly appeared in Zhongxian's mind. This lotus requires the nourishment of the purest energy to reach maturity. My Heaven's Path Zhenqi is incomparably pure. Will it suffice as a fertilizer for it? In the description regarding the 9 Heavens Lotus Embryo, in the very first line, it was stated that the lotus required nourishment from the purest energy to mature. Zhongxian didn't have sufficient spirit stones to feed it, but the Heaven's Path Zhenqi was incomparably pure. He could definitely give it a try. Thus, grabbing the stem of the lotus, Zhongxian sent a surge of Zhenqi in. Ah! As soon as the Zhenqi seeped in, a loud shriek echoed in the air. I've already said all that has to be said, please don't kill me. Mo Hunsheng was about to go mad. He had only just handed over the information regarding soul oracles when the other party infused his Zhenqi into the lotus at the next instant. There was not a single person in his position who wouldn't think that Zhongxian was trying to kill him now that his worth had been completely extracted. Ah! Realizing the significance of his actions, Zhongxian hurriedly stopped. He had only been thinking of nourishing the lotus with his Zhenqi. He forgot about the existence of the fellow inside. Soul oracles carried innate fear of Heaven's Path Zhenqi, and not to mention, this fellow had been severely injured by the dragon scale amulet. Thus, how could he possibly be able to withstand the onslaught of Zhenqi? It was already a blessing that he wasn't eradicated in an instant. Stopping the flow of Zhenqi, Zhongxian was just about to put the lotus back into his storage ring and study it more next time when he saw that the stem where he infused Zhenqi into previously had already turned white. It turned white. Could Heaven's Path Zhenqi really be effective? Zhongxian's eyes lit up. In a state of disbelief, he grabbed another stem and infused Zhenqi into the lotus. Ah! A terrifying scream of agony sounded from the lotus once more. A moment later, Zhongxian grabbed the lotus. It has turned white as well. Indeed, Heaven's Path Zhenqi can hasten the maturity of this object. Looking at the white stems, Zhongxian was delighted. Then, turning to Mo Hunsheng, he consoled, "I'm not trying to kill you, I'm just experimenting with this 9 hearts lotus. There's no need for you to be anxious, I'm just giving it a try. Just a short moment. Don't." "Ah!" Mo Hunsheng cried. "I'll listen to you obediently in the future, alright? If you were to give it more tries, there will be no need for you to get me out of the lotus anymore. I would have already died by then." At the opening of the cave, did something happen? Should we take a look? It sounds like Mo Hunsheng's shout of agony. Is Zhongshe alright? Hearing the shout of agony, the group who was in the midst of their meal stood up. Zhongshe said previously that there are some things he needs to investigate, so it's best for us not to interrupt him. Why don't we first try to determine the current situation inside before coming to a decision? Zhao Feiwu advised everyone with a grim expression. UN. Everyone nodded their heads and pricked their ears. After which, they vaguely heard a faint voice. "There's no need for you to be anxious, I'm just giving it a try. Just a short moment. Don't. Ah. Give a try. Short moment. No need to be anxious." Everyone stared at one another with widened eyes. Zhao Feiwu's face turned red, and it took her a while before she managed to speak. But the both of them are men. Chapter 5:15, Zhao Feiwu's true identity. After testing it for a bit, Zhongxian confirmed that the change in the 9 heavens lotus embryo was due to the Heaven's Path Zhenqi. Only then did he stop with eyes glowing in excitement. Possessing both the method of nurturing the lotus and to sever a portion of his soul, it was now just a matter of time before he succeeded in creating a clone. But before that, he had to find a way to get Mo Hunsheng out of the lotus first. Otherwise, as soon as he infused Zhenqi into the lotus, an ear-piercing cry could echo in the air. Most probably, before the lotus could even mature, the person trapped inside would have already died. In the end, a transcendent mortal 9-dan expert servant, even if he was no longer as strong as before, was still better than nothing at all. However, he had no way of getting Mo Hunsheng out now. Thus, Zhongxian turned his attention to the Soul Oracle cultivation technique. "I should first cultivate the Soul Oracle cultivation technique first so that I can nurture a Soul Rouse grass." The soul guiding formula that he had cultivated before was similar to the fire's Jushi realm. If one couldn't even absorb spiritual energy, one could never become a fighter. Similarly, if one couldn't draw out his soul, one possessed no aptitude whatsoever in becoming a soul oracle. Soul guiding formula was just a technique to draw one's soul out of his body. To strengthen one's soul, one would require another whole new set of cultivation techniques. As a 6-star soul oracle, Mo Hunsheng had many soul cultivation techniques in his arsenal. Adding his understanding of soul cultivation into the mix, Zhongxian managed to gather 1,000 books to compile together. After organizing them, Zhongxian realized that he had the perfected Heaven's Path soul art all the way until Transcendent Mortal 2-dan. Beyond 2-dan, there were some mistakes here and there in the cultivation techniques, thus making them unsuitable to learn. That's around the level of my current cultivation. I should start now. Zhongxian happened to be at Transcendent Mortal 1-dan pinnacle at the moment. If his soul were to reach the same level, he could exert the strength of both his Zhenqi and his soul simultaneously, and this could boost his fighting prowess significantly. Seated cross-legged on the floor, Zhongxian drew his soul out and began cultivating via the method detailed in the Heaven's Path soul art. TZZZZZZ. His soul energy swiftly surged. After an unknown period of time. Who? Zhong Xian's soul returned back to his body and he slowly opened his eyes. It was already daybreak. Sunlight shone in from the entrance of the cavern, blinding Zhong Xian's eyes. After a year of cultivation, my soul cultivation has reached transcendent mortal 2 Dan. Given that Zhong Xian had the complete Heaven's Path soul art all the way until transcendent mortal 2 Dan, as well as a middle-tier spirit stone to fuel his cultivation, in just a night's effort, Zhong Xian had already reached transcendent mortal 2 Dan. In other words, his soul cultivation was currently beyond his current cultivation. However, being a soul oracle is a taboo in the continent. It's best for me not to use the ability of a soul oracle recklessly. Just like poison masters, soul oracles were a feared existence. If someone were to know that Zhong Xian was able to draw his soul out and his soul possessed fighting power on its own, in the worst-case scenario, he might even be unable to keep his master-teacher license. Thus, unless when put in a desperate situation, Zhong Xian was determined not to resort to this method. I can start cultivating the soul rouse grass now. Stretching his back lazily, Zhong Xian stood up. Mo Hunsheng had already imparted the method of cultivating the soul rouse grass to him. In truth, soul rouse grass didn't refer to a specific medicinal herb but one nurtured using one's soul. A herb cultivated through such means would possess the attribute of rousing dormant souls. But the medicinal herb used couldn't just be any plant. It had to be one that was able to harness one's soul energy. Such medicinal herbs were hard to find, and so, he could only try looking through the market of the Myriad Kingdom city when he arrived there. Walking out of the cavern, Zhong Xian realized that everyone was awake. All of the fright and fatigue from the journey to the Soul Oracle tomb had disappeared through a night of rest, and the group seemed revitalized. They had already completed all preparations for departure. "Let's go to the Myriad Kingdom city," Zhong Xian said. Everyone jumped onto the back of Zhao Feiwu's spirit beast and soared into the sky. The demon Sank beast also followed suit as well. As for Hall Master Sai and Luo Zhu, they had already heard of the Master-Teacher tournament and they were interested in spectating it as well. Thus, they decided to tag along. Voila! The spirit beast looked as though a black line shooting through the sky. With the notorious demon Sank beast protecting them, there wasn't a single savage beast or spirit beast who dared to trifle with the group. In fact, even the experts riding on spirit beasts made sure to keep their distance upon sensing the deep hostility the demon Sank beast was emanating. Thus, the journey went smoothly without any hiccups. 5 days later, a massive city appeared before everyone's eyes. This city was even grander than Honghai City, and all kinds of infrastructures were ordered neatly in a specific pattern, creating a beautiful sight. Looking out of the window from the beast's back, Zhong Xian could see that the massive city was located in the midst of a giant plain. It seemed as though a clean and massive river flowing through the middle of the plains, bringing it boundless vitality and liveliness. The Myriad Kingdom Alliance has embassies from all of the countries that it trades with. There are also markets established by powers of equal standing here. In fact, Tier 2 Huanyu Empire even has a supply point here. There are many powers in the city, but regardless of who they are, as long as they are in Myriad Kingdom City, they have to obey the orders of the Alliance head resident. Zhao Feiwu chuckled. UN. Zhong Xian nodded. He had heard of the Alliance head residents. It was known as the royalty of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance, the one that wielded true power within the Alliance. He had heard of it from Su Shabak when he was in Tianwu Kingdom. Even though Master-Teacher Pavilion possessed an esteemed standing, they didn't interfere in governance. Usually, as long as there was no social upheaval, they wouldn't get involved in anything. As such, the power was mainly held in the hands of the Alliance head. There is still some time before the Master-Teacher tournament. Why don't you all follow me to the Alliance head residence to rest for a few days? You can use these days to look into the situation before heading to the Master-Teacher Pavilion, Zhao Feiwu said. There were still another 2 months before the Master-Teacher tournament, so there was no need to hurry. Alliance head residence. Could Zhao Gongzi be someone from the Alliance head residence? Hall Master Sai asked doubtfully. Zhao Feiwu had always been following behind Zhong Shi. All along, the rest had thought that she was Zhong Xian's friend, unaware that she was a local of the Myriad Kingdom city. Even Zhao Ya and the others only know that Zhao Gongzi was an envoy from the Alliance. They were unaware of her real identity as well. Yes. The Alliance head, Zhao Tianhao, is my father. Zhao Feiwu replied. You are Alliance head Zhao's son? That's not right. Alliance head Zhao only has a single son, Zhao Hui Gongzi, and I've met him before. Hall Master Sai was taken aback. Alliance head Zhao was the most influential person throughout the entire Myriad Kingdom Alliance. His son was in a position similar to the Crown Prince, and as the head of the Appraiser Hall, Hall Master Sai had met him several times before. Zhao Feiwu clearly wasn't him. I didn't intend to deceive everyone here. Just that, for the sake of convenience, I had no choice but to disguise myself. Chuckling lightly, Zhao Feiwu rubbed her face and her appearance began changing. Her main appearance didn't change much, but her features became from feminine, betraying her identity as a female. Even though she was still wearing male clothes, her disposition and her appearance were no different from a female. Her complexion was perfect, and she was no way inferior even when compared to Princess Mo Yu. You are a woman. Only then did Hall Master Sai, Luo Zhu, Zhao Ya, and the others come to a realization. The only one who was calm amongst them was Zhong Xian. When he first saw the other party, the Eye of Insight had already revealed her identity as a lady. Thus, he wasn't too surprised by her confession. Zhao Hui is my elder brother, and I am the second princess of the Alliance, Zhao Lian. Zhao Feiwu introduced herself. From young, I've been plagued with an affliction. In hopes that I can live like an ordinary person, he conferred me the title of the Dancing Princesses. That's where my name Zhao Feiwu comes from. Feiwu means dancing around, so, it's Princess Feiwu. Hall Master and Luo Zhu glanced at one another before coming to a realization. They had long heard of the ill second princess of the Alliance head, and according to the rumors, she was suffering from innate muscular deficiency. Despite searching throughout the Alliance, they were unable to find a single physician capable of treating it. As such, when they met Zhao Feiwu, given the other party's gender, they didn't think that it would be her. I've heard that Alliance head Zhao conferred this title to the ill second princess in hopes that she could dance lithely like the elegant swallows. However, it's a pity that despite the reward he's offered, no one has managed to find a cure yet. Why would? Hall Master Sai asked doubtfully. Princess Feiwu's illness had shocked many. Countless physicians had stepped forward only to leave in defeat. Logically speaking, she should be confined to her bed, unable to move at all. How could she be walking around as though an ordinary human being? Could there be some falsehood in the rumors? Zhongsha saved me. Zhao Feiwu chuckled and her bright eyes shone. Oh. Hall Master Sai suddenly came to a realization. After learning of the other party's identity, he had been wondering why the princess, one of the most authoritative figures in the Myriad Kingdom Alliance, would follow Zhongsha around and treat him with utmost respect. The other party's reply had finally solved this lingering doubt of his. I've long heard of Zhongsha's outstanding medical skills, but I didn't expect you to be so formidable. Hall Master Sai laughed bitterly. Back then, Sun Qiong had bragged about how formidable his young master's medical skills were. At the Coke's Ridge, he had witnessed with his own eyes how formidable the other party's knockout treatment method was. However, it was only after hearing Princess Feiwu words did he truly realize how fearsome Zhongsha's medical skills were. The princess's innate muscular deficiency had caused a huge uproar throughout the Alliance then, and countless physicians had taken a look at her condition only to find that they were helpless against it. Just by the fact that Zhongsha was able to solve it meant that his medical skills were probably superior to most physicians in the Myriad Kingdom Alliance. Zhongsha, Feiwu didn't mean to lie to you. I beseech for your forgiveness. After introducing herself, Zhao Feiwu turned to Zhongsha and bowed deeply. Even though this young man was of the same age as her, he had already attained a high level of proficiency as a master teacher, physician, appraiser, formation master. He wouldn't even pale in comparison to that famous elder brother of hers. This made her feel awe for the other party. Even though Zhongshan knew that the other party was a lady, upon learning that she was the princess, he was still rather surprised. Seeing that the other party was speaking to him, Zhongxian suddenly thought of something. You're being too polite. Since you're the princess, you should be able to gather news easily. I just so happen to have something I need your help to look into. Zhongshe, feel free to speak. Zhao Feiwu nodded. It must be said that she was indeed extremely pretty. Even though her cultivation was so, she had a valiant disposition which accentuated her aesthetics. After pondering for a moment, Zhongxian said, I wish to purchase a soul-calming grass, and the greater its maturity, the better it is. Otherwise, sentiment drowning flower would work as well. It'll be best if they have a maturity of 500 years and above. More importantly, they should be fresh and alive. Dried herbs will be useless for my agenda. Can Princess Feiwu help me look into the matter? To nurture a soul-rouse grass, the medicinal herb must be capable of harnessing one's soul energy. Over the past few days, Zhongxian had been contemplating over the matter, and in the end, he concluded that it would be easiest to find these two herbs within the Myriad Kingdom Alliance. The soul-calming grass and sentiment-drowning flower. These two medicinal herbs weren't famous, but they were extremely valuable. As Zhongxian wasn't well connected in the alliance, it would be difficult for him to find these herbs. On the other hand, as the princess of the alliance, Zhao Feiwu should be able to find them easily. Soul-calming grass and sentiment-drowning flower? Fresh ones. Not expecting Zhongshe to ask for these things, Zhao Feiwu frowned. Chapter 516. Alliance Head Soul-calming grass could calm one's mind, placing one in an imperturbable state. Sentiment-drowning flower could stabilize one's mental fortitude, making one less affected by emotional changes. These two medicinal herbs were extremely rare, and there were less than a handful of them in the Myriad Kingdom Alliance. For those herbs to be alive and possess a maturity of 500 years on top of that, the difficulty was extremely high. I'm not too sure either, but when we arrive at the Alliance head residence, I can ask my father about it. Even if he doesn't know where he can find it, I'm sure he can help you look into it, Zhao Feiwu replied. Zhongxian nodded. Her father, as the head of the Alliance, wielded immense influence and power. It should be a walk in the park for him to find a single medicinal herb. Thus, Zhongxian nodded his head and fell silent. Standing quietly by the window, he continued reinforcing his cultivation. Even though he hadn't reached Transcendent Mortal 2 Dan yet, his efforts in the past 5 days had made his zhenqi had become even purer and denser. From his experience with the immense zhenqi consumption from the Red Dust Heaven ascending steps, he realized that on top of purity, the denseness of one's zhenqi was extremely important as well. As such, in the past few days, he had been working hard accumulating his zhenqi into his dantian. His efforts had increased the quantity of zhenqi had at least increased by a tenth. One shouldn't underestimate this tenth. Using the Red Dust Heaven ascending steps as a gauge, it could sustain him for another 2 to 3 breaths. In this time, he could descend back to the ground, thus avoiding a tragic fall. For the rest of the journey, there wasn't much of a conversation among the group. The spirit beast continued proceeding forward, and soon, a grand building appeared in everyone's sight. As the center of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance, the Alliance head residence carried an imposing aura. Even before arriving at the location, everyone could already feel a heavy pressure pushing down on them. Chuckling, Zhao Feiwu explained, even my spirit beast is not allowed to fly straight into the Alliance head residence. Let's alight here. The spirit beast they were riding on flapped its wings and descended to the ground. Soon, it stopped at a vast square right in front of the Alliance head residence. Jumping off the back of the spirit beast, Zhongxian scanned the surroundings and was awed. As expected of the center of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance. Not only were the buildings towering, they were even infused with spiritual energy. Without even taking a closer examination, it was clear that they were filled with formations. If someone dared to wreak havoc here, the formations would be more than enough to slaughter them. It was no wonder that Zhao Feiwu dared not enter the Alliance head residence riding on the back of a spirit beast. If she were to do so, it would probably trigger some formation. Lifting his gaze, Zhongxian saw a few soldiers patrolling the Alliance head residence. They were all dressed in grey armor and they had a spear each in their hands. A powerful aura could be felt from them. Zongsha realm experts. Zhong Xian was surprised. To think that even the most ordinary guards here were Zongsha realm expert. No one of Qianxian kingdom had reached this level, and even in a tier 2 kingdom where Liu Shi and the others resided in, that was the level of the old ancestor of a country. Yet, over here, they were only an ordinary guard. The huge disparity was truly astonishing. But thinking about it, that was to be expected. After all, the Myriad Kingdom City had 4-star master teachers. Just by listening to the class of such an expert, one's understanding of cultivation would surely experience a huge leap. Surpassing one's bottleneck would become significantly easier. Even if one couldn't listen to the lessons of an expert of that caliber, the lessons of a 2-star and 3-star master teachers were fairly useful as well. Besides, as a prosperous commercial city, the Myriad Kingdom City was rich in resources. As such, it wasn't too surprising for the overall prowess of its population to be much stronger. Zhao Ya and the others had initially thought that Jizuan realm was already formidable. However, after seeing the guards, they couldn't help but feel disheartened. As expected of the capital of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance, it was indeed formidable. Your humble servant pays respect to Princess Feiwu and Lord Jin. Just as the group were awed by the sight, a group of soldiers walked over and a golden-armored commander stepped forward and welcomed them. Zhao Wufei's transcendent mortal 3-dan mount was known by everyone in the Alliance head residence. Its presence surely meant that the princess had returned as well. The commander's aura was slightly influencing his surroundings, thus revealing his strong control over the environment. It was clear from this that he was a transcendent mortal expert. Prepare a clean and spiritual energy-rich courtyard for my friends to live in. Make sure to serve them well. Zhao Feiwu commanded impassively. She had never shown this side of her to Zhong Xian and the others, but at this moment, the disposition of an authoritative princess was clearly shown through her movement and words. Yes. The commander nodded his head and hurriedly got into action. Yuan. Nodding her head, Zhao Feiwu turned around and said, Zhongsha, let me take you to meet my father. All right. Nodding his head, Zhong Xian delegated some instructions to Zhao Ya and the others before leaving with Zhao Feiwu. The palace wasn't too extravagant, and there weren't many guards here as well. It was extraordinarily peaceful here, reminiscent of a tranquil garden. If not for Zhao Feiwu leading the way and the huge number of guards defending the area outside, Zhong Xian would have thought that he was in the wrong place. My father doesn't like a ruckus, so there aren't any guards here. Besides, this is the Alliance head residence, so there won't be anyone so foolish as to cause trouble here. Noticing Zhong Xian's doubts, Zhao Feiwu chuckled. Yuan. Zhong Xian nodded his head. Ever since his reincarnation, he had visited various palaces and without an exception, they all had tight security. Yet, this location formed a stark contrast to the norm. It seemed like Zhao Feiwu's father had absolute confidence in his strength. While the both of them chatted, they walked down several corridors and finally arrived at a large hall. Someone entered the hall to report their presence. A moment later, the same person returned and invited them in. Entering the hall, Zhong Xian immediately saw an authoritative-looking middle-aged man seated on the seat at the direct center of the room. He was exuding an exceptionally powerful aura that wasn't inferior even when compared to the demon-sank beast. Clearly, he had reached transcendent mortal 4-dan pinnacle as well. Even when compared to Hall Master Han whom he had seen before, this middle-aged man was clearly much stronger. The both of them might be transcendent mortal 4-dan pinnacle experts, but the aura the latter was exuding showed the huge distance between their strength. It was just like how Hall Master Han Chong and the various elders, despite teaming together against the demon-sank beast, were unable to defeat it. Father. Zhao Feiwu stepped forward and greeted. Yuan, you've returned. The middle-aged man nodded his head. Then, his bright eyes fell on Zhong Xian. Being in an authoritative position for such a long time, he carried a majestic disposition that naturally commanded fear in others. Even the head of the Physician Guild, Guild leader Meng, would stutter in fear before him. Yet, this 20-year-old lad was able to keep his composure. Just by this in itself, He could tell that the other party wasn't a simple figure. Smiling slightly, Alliance head Zhao said, "You must be Zhongshe. I am Zhong Xian. My greetings to the Alliance head." Zhong Xian nodded. UN. Seeing the other party's humble attitude, Alliance head Zhao felt even more satisfied with the young man before him. "I've heard of your affairs. Despite being under 20, you are already a 2-star master teacher. You've challenged Qianwu Kingdom's Wall of Dilemma and solved all of the questions on it, undergone the harmonious stream of flowing goblets and became certified as a 5-star appraiser, and on top of all that, you even managed to save Hallmaster Han. Not to mention, you cured my daughter of her affliction as well. You're truly a talented man, Alliance Master. I am unworthy of your praise." Zhong Xian felt a little bizarre that the other party knew his affairs so clearly, but after giving it some thoughts, he felt that it was to be expected. After all, his daughter was traveling alone despite having only just recovered from her affliction. Even though Jin Songhai was protecting her, he couldn't help but feel worried. Most likely, he sent some men to keep tabs on his daughter's trail, so it wasn't too surprising for him to know of those matters. Besides, Jin Songhai, as his subordinate, would surely report these matters to him as well. Having been in control of the Alliance for many years, I've seen many geniuses. However, men of Zhongshe's caliber are indeed rare. Alliance head Zhao complimented. Just as Zhong Xian had thought, Jin Songhai had reported most of the matters that they had gone through. Even though he had excluded the matter regarding the Soul Oracle Tomb and the Celestial Master Teacher, the affairs that he had gone through had shocked the Alliance Master. Despite being under 20, the other party was a 5-star appraiser, quasi 4-star formation master, 3-star painter, 2-star master teacher. His titles and capability could leave anyone and everyone awed. As the most influential person in the Alliance, he had seen countless great geniuses. However, when compared to him, they were all like fireflies before the burning sun. Zhongshe's aim for coming to Myriad Kingdom City must be to participate in the Master Teacher Tournament, right? After chatting for a moment, Alliance head Zhao asked. UN. Zhong Xian nodded his head. Back then, he had promised Su She and Ling She on the matter. Since he was already here now, naturally, he should at least participate in it. But more importantly, the reward for the Master Teacher Tournament was generous. The Master Teacher Tournament gathers countless geniuses from the 27 Master Teacher Pavilions. Even though Zhongshe's talent is outstanding, it probably won't be too easy to rank amidst the top. Speaking of the Master Teacher Tournament, Alliance head Zhao shook his head bitterly. Having read through the other party's background, he knew that the person before of him had outstanding talent. However, getting a good placing among the 28 powers wouldn't be easy. If it was that simple, the Myriad Kingdom Alliance Master Teacher Pavilion wouldn't have ranked amidst the bottom all this while. Forget it, let's not talk about that. There were still 2 more months before the end of the tournament. Knowing that it was still too early to talk of all these, Alliance Master Zhao shook his head. Zhongshe's extraordinary medical skill has saved my daughter's life. I would like to show my gratitude to you. If you have any request, as long as it's within my means, I'll surely try my best to fulfill it. Alliance head, you're being too polite. However, I do have a request to ask of. Since the other party had already made an offer, Zhong Xian didn't stand on ceremony. Even though the other party was the powerful head of the Alliance, Zhong Xian had undergone many things in his journey here. Such a situation was no longer sufficient to leave him tense. Alliance head Zhao turned his gaze to Zhong Xian. Actually, it's like that. I need a medicinal herb, but I'm not too sure where I can obtain it. I hope that the Alliance head can help me look into the matter. Zhong Xian raised the issue of the soul-calming grass and sentiment-drowning flower. Soul-calming grass? I've never heard of it before. However, I do know of one sentiment-drowning flower of maturity 500 years and above. Furthermore, it's still alive. Alliance head Zhao hesitated for a moment before replying. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up. Soul-calming grass and sentiment-drowning flower were both basic ingredient required for cultivating the soul-rouse grass. Just one stalk was enough. However, even though I know where it is, it won't be easy to get it. Alliance head Zhao shook his head. Oh. Zhongshe, you'll understand once I finish my part of the story. The place where most medicinal herbs are gathered would be herb kings. Following which would be the Apothecary Guild and Physician Guild. I believe that as a master teacher, Zhongshe should be well aware of this, Alliance head Zhao said. Zhongxian nodded his head. Herb king actually just refers to merchants dealing with bulks of medicinal herbs. In terms of variety and quantity of herbs, there was no one who could beat them. After them would be the Apothecary Guild and Physician Guild, which used humongous quantity of medicinal herbs on a daily basis. Due to the nature of their occupations, these three parties usually had a huge reserve of medicinal herbs. Chapter 517. The reckless demon sank beast. However, the herbs from those three parties are mostly dried. They don't possess much herbs that are still alive, let alone a rare medicinal herb like the sentiment drowning flower, Alliance head Zhao said. These three locations were where most medicinal herbs were concentrated at. As dried herbs shared the same medicinal property and they were easier to store, most of the herbs were dried before putting into storage. As such, there were basically no fresh medicinal herbs there. There are various sources to a herb king's medicinal herbs. The most common source would be the herbologists, but rare herbs like the sentiment drowning flower wouldn't appear in those fields. Besides, ordinary herbologists don't have the ability to nurture it. I do know of a herbologist who possesses such capability. That person has a herb garden in the west of the Myriad Kingdom city, and she has all kinds of bizarre herbs in her herb garden. Most of them are rare herbs that one could hardly see in the market. However, Alliance head Zhao smiled bitterly. The owner of the herb garden has an eccentric personality, and she's nearly completely unsympathetic. Her herbs aren't for sale, regardless of how high a price one offers. Back then, I've tried to purchase some unique herbs from her for Liana's illness, but I was turned away. Aren't for sale? Zhongxian was perplexed. What does she need so many medicinal herbs for then? Given the humongous quantity of medicinal herbs the other party had, she couldn't possibly consume all of it herself. And since that was the case, what was the point keeping them? Medicinal herbs were just like ordinary plants in the sense that they had a limited lifespan. Even though there were some herbs that could live for several centuries, most only had a lifespan of a few years. More importantly, planting herbs and maintaining the herb garden were extremely expensive. Spirit stones, unique fertilizer, and manpower, these three were essential for any herb garden. Refusing to sell any medicinal herbs meant that one was pumping money in without any income. No matter how rich one was, it was impossible to sustain in the long run. I have no idea either. There are many in Myriad Kingdom City who have been wondering about that, but no one knows the real answer. Alliance head Zhao shook his head. Then, doesn't anyone think of stealing from her? Zhongxian was perplexed. Given how the other party had the medicinal herbs that most needed, surely there should be some who were willing to take the risk. Of course, people try to, but all of them ended in failure. The owner of the herb garden, Shuai, reached transcendent mortal Dan pinnacle 50 years ago. No one knows what level she has reached since then, and even I am unconfident of defeating her, Alliance head Zhao said. Given how the other party was a transcendent mortal Dan pinnacle expert 50 years ago, even if she had been unable to make a breakthrough, she was probably ranked in the very top among the experts of Myriad Kingdom City. More importantly, the herb garden has an exceptionally powerful formation set up by Guild Master Zheng of Honghai City's Formation Master Guild. It is at least of 4-star pinnacle, and many of those who try to steal the herbs within end up being killed or confined before they could even reach the fields. Soon, everyone realized that it is impossible to succeed, so no one dared to try so anymore, Alliance head Zhao said. Refusing to sell the herbs and killing or confining those who dare to lay their hands on her herbs. This fellow was indeed a tough nut to crack. Is there anywhere else that could have these two medicinal herbs? There isn't. Other than this herb garden, I can't think of anywhere else that might this herb, except for dry ones. Dry ones are meaningless to me. Zhongxian shook his head. Only living herbs could be used to cultivate the soulrouse grass. Once the herb was dried, how could it possibly harness soul energy to gain the effect of waking one's soul? Where is the herb garden you speak of located? I would like to take a look myself. Zhong Xian had to nurture a soul-rouse grass by hook or by crook. This was the only way he could save Lu Chong. Since he even went to a place as dangerous as the Soul Oracle tomb for it, no matter how troublesome the owner of the herb garden was, he would just have to find a way to deal with her. Hearing that the other party wanted to give it a try, Alliance head Zhao hesitated for a moment. All right then. I'll have Jin Songhai accompany you. This way, even if she lays a hand on you, you'll at least be able to withstand her assault for a moment. All right. Zhong Xian nodded his head. He didn't know the location of the herb garden, so he needed someone to lead the way. Father, I would like to take a look as well, Zhao Feiwu hurriedly said. What are you going there for? Alliance head Zhao frowned. The owner of the herb garden doesn't listen to even your words. I want to see how formidable she is. Zhao Feiwu chuckled. Having followed behind Zhong Xian the past few days, she knew that the other party was a person who would never give up until he achieved his goal. Honestly, she was curious to see whether the difficult herb garden owner or the formidable Zhong Shi would emerge victorious in the clash. Seeing that her father was hesitating, Zhao Feiwu hurriedly added, "Don't worry, Elder Jin is around. Besides, no matter how disrespectful that herb garden owner may be, she won't lay her hands on me." After hesitating for a moment, Alliance head Zhao said, "All right then. The two of you'd better be careful, especially Zhong Shi. If the other party refuses to sell the herb, by no means should you insist on the issue. If it really comes down to it, I'll make a trip myself and perhaps she might sell me this favor." Back then, he had sent a subordinate to request for the required medicinal herbs only to end up being rejected. After which, he had intended to go over himself, but just then, they managed to find some medicinal herbs from the Physician Guild in replacement. Thus, the matter was settled just like that. Zhong Shi was his daughter's savior, and on top of that, the other party's outstanding talent also made it likely that he would accomplish great things in the future. Thus, if things didn't go well, he didn't mind stepping forward to help. As the head of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance, a transcendent mortal 4-dan pinnacle expert, no matter how eccentric the other party's temper was, she should still sell the herbs in consideration of his identity. After asking a few more questions, Zhong Xian bade Alliance head Zhao farewell and left with Zhao Feiwu and Jin Songhai. Riding on an aerial savage beast, they left for the west of the city. The Myriad Kingdom Alliance was exceptionally large, extending for nearly several hundred kilometers. If one were to walk on their feet, it would take several hours to reach the herb garden. This time, the trio didn't ride on Zhao Feiwu's mount but the demon-sank beast. As a transcendent mortal 4-dan pinnacle spirit beast, its movement was as swift as though a bolt of lightning. In just a few dozen minutes, the trio could spot a gigantic garden appearing before their eyes. The garden was several hundred mu large, and it was shrouded by a light mist. With just a single glance, one could tell that it was guarded by a huge formation. 1 mu equals 666. 6 square meters, let's alight here. Knowing that they weren't allowed to fly straight in, Zhong Xian nodded his head and the demon-sank beast landed at an area not too far away from the main door. The doors to the garden were tightly shut, and there wasn't a single person to be seen at the door. It seemed like everyone knew that the herbs here weren't for sale, so they all lost their interest. Otherwise, given the huge demand for medicinal herbs, it was impossible for a huge herb garden like this to be completely devoid of customers. Jin Songhai stepped forward and just as he was about to knock on the door, the door opened and a maid stepped forward. "Our herb garden doesn't sell any medicinal herb. Please leave." It seemed like she was already used to people coming over in search of medicinal herbs. As soon as she saw Zhong Xian and group, she immediately tried to chase them away. Not expecting to be rejected right before he could say anything, Zhong Xian felt a little helpless. How could he hope to purchase any medicinal herb when he was denied entry at the front door? Just as Zhong Xian was about to say something to persuade the other party to give way, the galloping of the horses suddenly sounded. Then, a carriage stopped at a direction not too far away and a middle-aged man alighted. "Garden owner Mu, please enter." Upon identifying the person, the maid immediately respectfully opened the gates to allow him entry. "Didn't you say that you don't sell any medicinal herbs? Why is he able to enter then?" Jin Songhai frowned. This was too stark a contrast. They were being turned away at the door while the other party was allowed to strut it. Was identity a criterion to entering the garden as well? I apologize, but he's a guest of our owner. He holds an invitation letter in his hand. The maid spoke apologetically. One can enter as long as they have an invitation letter? Zhong Xian asked doubtfully. Before the maid could reply, a cold and arrogant voice sounded. Of course. The one who spoke was a curvaceous lady who seemed to be in her 30s. She had a thick makeup on, and even before her appearance, a heavy scent of rouge was already lingering in the air. Garden owner Shuai is conducting a banquet tonight and only other garden owners are allowed to enter. Don't think that just any lowly peasant can enter this area. If you wish to purchase medicinal herbs, you should just leave right now. We don't welcome you here. Tilting her face up high, the lady spoke arrogantly. Her gaze was filled with cold disdain. Banquet. Only garden owners are allowed to enter. If that's the case, you must be a garden owner as well. Zhao Feiwu said. Of course. I am the garden owner of Green Mist Garden, Luo Qingyang. With a proud look, the beautiful lady flicked her wrist and took out a letter. It was the invitation to the herb garden. Do you see it? This is the invitation letter. If you don't have it, leave right now. Don't cause any trouble. Staring coldly at Zhong Xian, the lady snickered. Judging from your appearance, you aren't even 20 years old yet. At your age, I doubt that you can even differentiate among the various herbs. A high-class banquet like this is clearly out of your league. Don't try to get ahead of yourself. Study hard and maybe in 50 years or so, you might just get the chance to come in. Ha 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 ha. Chuckling beneath her hands, the lady straightened her back. Her voluptuous chests looked uncomfortable in her tight dress, and they threatened to break free from their restraints. 50 years. Zhong Xian shook his head. Turning to the maid guarding the door, he asked, Can anyone with the invitation letter enter? That's right. The maid contemplated over the prior instruction from her superior and hurriedly nodded her head. That's good. Hearing the other party's affirmative reply, Zhong Xian turned to the curvaceous lady and scratched his head sheepishly. I wish to negotiate with you. Can you lend me your invitation letter? Lend you? Ha ha ha. As though hearing the most hilarious joke in the world, the curvaceous lady burst into laughter. Following which, she stared down at Zhong Xian with a look of disdain. Why should I lend it to you? Garden owner Shuai gave this to me. Who do you think you are? You refuse. Zhong Xian glanced at the curvaceous lady. You'd better scram before I fly into a temper. Otherwise, I swear you will be carried out of here. Bellowing furiously, a powerful aura flowed out from her. Transcendent Mortal 3 Dan. You intend to kill me? Shaking his head, Zhong Xian glanced behind and instructed, Demon Sank, negotiate with her in my stead and see if you can borrow the invitation letter from her. Roar. Hearing the order, the Demon Sank beast roared deeply and flew over. What do you intend to do? Before she could react, a humongous shadow appeared before her and a giant backside came crushing down her head. Putong. Just like that, she was crushed into the earth. Only her limbs and brain were spared, and she spewed huge mouthfuls of blood. Ding. After sitting down on the other party, the Demon Sank beast grabbed the invitation letter from the other party's hands with its mouth and threw it to Zhong Xian. Jin Songhai and Zhao Feiwu staggered. Their eyes were about to pop out from their eyes. Wasn't it supposed to be a negotiation? Why did it suddenly turn out like that? Chapter 518. The depressed Zhong Xian to be crushed by that massive Demon Sank beast who weighed 10,000 kilograms. Just the thought of it was sufficient to leave the two trembling. Shaking their head, the duo glanced at the curvaceous lady who was on the verge of fainting in sympathy. Of all people you could offend, why did you have to offend this fellow? This Zhong Shi may seem to be a pushover, but in truth, he was a troublemaker who feared nothing in the world. Otherwise, he couldn't have possibly charged single-handedly into the Shenyuan kingdom and destroy its entire royal family. If one were to speak politely with him, he would reply with equal courtesy. But given how you lashed out at him as though a madman, it would be a wonder if he didn't teach you a lesson. You are already very lucky that he didn't make you acknowledge him as your teacher on the spot. He even dared to command a transcendent mortal 9-dan expert to acknowledge him as teacher. As for you, piece of cake. While the duo was shocked by the sight before them, the lady crushed under the demon-sank beast felt like she was on the verge of going insane. As a powerful, beautiful, and influential garden owner, countless people vied for her favor. She thought that this fellow was just trying to attract her attention or even flirt with her by asking her for the invitation letter. Yet, he actually sent his spirit beast after her. Spurting large mouthfuls of blood, the curvaceous lady, Luo Qingyang, was frenzied. You! I want to kill you! Shrieking furiously, she was just about to gather her strength to push away the massive figure above her when she heard the displeased voice of the young man not too far away. Demon sank, what's wrong with you? Didn't I tell you to negotiate with her to borrow the invitation letter from her? Which part of borrow don't you understand? Why are you acting on your own whim? Do you still have any respect left for me, your master? Roar! The demon-sank beast was stunned. Its massive lantern-like eyes blinked in confusion. Even though it possessed intelligence on par with humans, it still wasn't too well versed with the language of the humans. Most probably, it mistook Zhongxian's negotiate for snatch. Besides, this fellow was used to being arrogant. It had always snatched whatever he wanted. If it wasn't for that, the Myriad Kingdom Alliance wouldn't have sent so many experts after him. Even if it had truly interpreted Zhongxian's negotiate correctly, how could it have the patience to do so? All right, enough. Stop putting on an act. Since you've made a mistake, you should be punished. You shall remain on that spot for an hour. Without my order, you are not to move at all. That young man berated furiously. Pu. Luo Qingyan's fresh blood spurted out. Her face was filled with tears. Are you punishing it or me? You could have gotten it to sit somewhere else, and yet, you ordered it to remain on the spot for an hour. By the time it's done with its punishment, I will have already died. While she was spurting blood, Zhao Feiwu stepped forward and said, "We're here to buy medicinal herbs. It'll be best if we don't cause any unnecessary trouble." You're right. The young man nodded his head. Thus, he turned to the maid at the entrance and passed the invitation letter over. All right, here's my invitation letter. Can I enter now? The maid. Honestly speaking, she was on the verge of losing her mind as well. She had seen plenty of arrogant people, but the young man before her topped it all. The invitation letter showed a proof of the person's standing, identity, and the garden owner's courtesy. Snatching it like that. Would any sane person do it that way? More importantly, even if you wished to do it, you could have done it discreetly where no one was around. If I didn't know about it, I could at least overlook the matter and allow you in. But to snatch it right before my eyes, do you really think that I'm blind? What was even more infuriating was that, even after you're done, you still have the cheek to present the invitation letter to me and innocently ask if you can enter or not. Enter your head. Infuriated, her chest puffed up and she was ready to explode at any time. No way. How dare you snatch an invitation letter right before my eyes? Unless you kill me, don't even dream of entering. Clenching her pearly teeth tightly together, the maid drove her zhenqi, seemingly prepared to prevent Zhongxian from entering even if it would cost her life. No way. The herb garden's dignity mustn't be sullied. Just as she was about to make a move, the young man hesitated for a moment before asking, "Lady, are you ill?" The maid staggered. "You sure are scum. I didn't allow you to enter and you immediately say that I'm ill. You're the one who is ill, your entire family is ill." She had never felt so angry before. If she could, she would immediately charge forward to beat that fellow to death. Flicking her wrist, a weapon appeared in her hand. Just as she was about to make a move, the young man's voice sounded once more. "I see that the yang bai acupoint on your glabella is slightly red, and the zhenqi flow in the left of your body is a little stifled. If I'm not mistaken, do you suffer from severe headaches every night, and it will feel as though the back of your head is convulsing?" You. The furious maid suddenly froze. The other party was correct. She did suffer from splitting headaches every night, and it was as if the back of her head was convulsing violently. She had visited the physician guild to have it checked, but the results were inconclusive. As such, she could only bear with it. How in the world did this fellow know about it? Not only so, junqi doesn't flow through the meridian of your right thigh smoothly, resulting in your strength being imbalanced. As such, your cultivation has reached a bottleneck, and you find yourself being unable to take the final step forward. If I'm not mistaken, you are secretly cultivating an ice attribute cultivation technique. Am I right? The other party's voice continued. Why you? How did you know? The maid was taken aback. She had found her cultivation coming to a standstill recently. In order to boost her cultivation, she chose to cultivate an ice attribute cultivation technique. However, she kept this matter a secret, and even her bosom buddies were kept in the dark. How did this fellow learn of it? It doesn't matter how I know it. You were once injured by the attack of a person who cultivates a yang attribute cultivation technique, causing a surge of yang energy to clog up your meridians. Your original intention is to cultivate an ice attribute cultivation technique to neutralize the yang energy so that you can regain your cultivation talent. The young man before her shook his head. Your idea isn't bad, but the method you used couldn't be any more wrong. The maid trembled in shock. Her eyes were so huge that they were about to fall to the floors. Her mouth was agape, but not a single word could express her emotions at the moment. She had indeed fought with a person of yang attribute a year ago, and due to an injury from that battle, her cultivation came to a standstill. As such, she lost the right to cultivate medicinal herbs and was reduced to becoming a doorman. With his hands behind his back, the young man calmly explained, yin and yang do neutralize one another. However, the surge of yang energy in your body has already fused with your blood and meridian. Cultivating an ice attribute cultivation technique all of the sudden will only turn your body into a battlefield. Of course, with every battle, the yang attribute junqi would slowly diminish with each battle. However, the ice attribute junqi would also be scattered throughout your body during the collision, and some of them would flow along with your bloodstream into your head, thus inducing that sharp splitting headache of yours. The maid's lips quivered. Is there any cure for it? The other party's analysis was logical. She had thought that the headache was caused by her fatigue, and never in her dream did she expect that it would be a product from her cultivating an ice attribute cultivation technique. Thinking about it, the headache did indeed start from the moment she started cultivating this cultivation technique. Not only did the other party notice her symptoms, he even found out the cause of the illness, something that even the physicians of the physician guild were unable to. To be able to do so much with a single glance. Who in the world was this person? The treatment method is simple. You just have to practice the fallen flower swordsmanship 5 times every day while driving your junqi. Within 10 days, you'll make a complete recovery, Zhong Xian said. How did you know that I have learned the fallen flower swordsmanship? The maid's body swayed once more. The fallen flower swordsmanship was imparted to her by garden owner Shui, and among her sisters, she was the only one who'd managed to master it. How did the other party manage to discern so much when all she had done was take out her sword? Was she dreaming? Crushing garden owner Qingyang to the floor, leaving her spewing large mouthfuls of blood on the ground, to steal her invitation letter. Seeing through her illness with a single glance and offering a solution to it on top of that. Was this fellow spouting nonsense or was he serious? Ignoring the other party's question, the young man continued with an impassive expression. The fallen flower swordsmanship allows one to create sword chi reminiscent of a fallen flower. If you were to drive your junqi while executing this technique, you can drive the yang energy clogged within your body out along with the sword chi. If you were to do it 5 times a day over a course of 10 days, the yang energy should completely dissipate, and there should be no after effect even if you were to continue cultivating the ice attribute cultivation technique. Hearing that the treatment method was that simple, the maid hesitated for a moment before gritting her teeth. Lifting the sword in her hand, she began doing as the other party instructed. The fallen flower swordsmanship created junqi reminiscent of fallen flowers. In an instant, a paradise filled with falling petals seemed to have appeared before everyone's eyes. However, each of these petals carried an extraordinarily sharp and cold aura, creating a sight of desolate beauty. Zhongxian couldn't help but feel awed as he watched the swordsmanship. As expected of the myriad kingdom city, even a maid guarding the entrance was at half transcension. Soon, the maid finished the entire sword routine. Sensing the changes in her body, she widened her eyes in astonishment and delight. It was just the first time, but her body already felt much more comfortable. The yang energy which she'd thought she would never be able to rid of had indeed dissipated by a little. Even though there was still a significant amount of it left in her meridian, at the very least, this meant that what the other party had said was true. Her affliction could really be treated by this method. Thank you for your guidance. Sheathing her sword, the maid clasped her fists politely. At this moment, her anger had already vanished completely. To be able to see through the problem in her cultivation and allocate a treatment method to it, the other party's means were even more incredible than the physicians of the Physician Guild. Without a doubt, the person before her was anything but simple. A person of his caliber couldn't possibly come here just to cause trouble. UN. Zhongxian waved his hands nonchalantly. The other party's problem wasn't too complicated, so it didn't take too much trouble. Chuckling softly, he spoke with a refined tone. May I enter now? May I know who Gongzi is? The maid couldn't help but ask. Even though she knew that the other party was a formidable figure, she still had to inquire on his identity first. Otherwise, she couldn't account for his entry to the garden owner. This is Zhongshe. Jin Songhai stepped forward and replied. Zhongshe? You're a master teacher? The maid was taken aback. UN. Zhongxian was perplexed. Even if I am a master teacher, surely you need not be so surprised. After all, there is a huge bunch of master teachers in Myriad Kingdom City. If only I knew that you are a master teacher, I won't have blocked your path. For the banquet tonight, the garden owner has declared that on top of the other garden owners, all master teachers are allowed to enter the premises of the herb garden freely. The maid said. Master teachers can enter freely? Zhongxian's body swayed and his vision went dark. What in the world was this? If only he knew that it was that simple, he wouldn't have gotten the demon-sank beast to make a move. Just to enter this herb garden, he went through so much trouble. Only to realize that his efforts were meaningless. Zhongshe, this way please. After confirming the other party's identity, the maid immediately gestured the young man in. UN. Suppressing his frustration, Zhongxian proceeded into the garden along with Zhao Feiwu and Jin Songhai. However, barely after taking 2 steps, he saw the maid pointing to Luo Qingyang, who was still crushed under the demon-sank beast. Zhongshe, what about garden owner Qingyang? Oh. Go and rest by the side first, I'll call you later on. Knowing the other party's intention, Zhongxian waved the demon-sank beast away. Even though it was an accident that the demon-sank beast had misunderstood his intentions, that lady had it coming. Since she dared to disrespect a master teacher, she should have been ready to be punished. Roar. Hearing the command, the demon-sank beast nodded. Shaking its giant backside, it spread its wings and soared into the sky. Damn it! Damn it! With her squashed body, Luo Qingyang stared hatefully at the departing backs of Zhongxian and the others. Her body trembled and she gritted her teeth in resentment. As the garden owner of Green Mist Herb Garden, her standing was on par with the nobility of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance. When had she suffered such injustice? To be sat on by a spirit beast. This was an insult. Even if the other party was a master teacher, she refused to simply let this matter go. Garden owner Qingyang, what's wrong? Just as she swore to exact vengeance on that hateful young man, a surprised voice suddenly sounded. Following which, a young man donning a master teacher emblem with 4 shining stars on top walked over. Chapter 519, Herbologist clans that young man was actually a 4-star master teacher. Luo Qingyang pays respect to Songshe. Upon seeing the young man, Luo Qingyang hurriedly clasped her fist respectfully. If Zhongxian was here, he would surely recognize the other party as the man who'd bought the soulless metal humanoid from him in Honghai City. Garden owner Qingyang, this. Seeing the beautiful and proud garden owner covered with mud from head to toe, Song Chao muttered doubtfully. After receiving the soulless metal humanoid, he immediately returned back to the Myriad Kingdom city. Recalling the guidance of Zhongshe, he immediately visited all the herb gardens to buy the necessary herbs. It was because of this that he'd met this garden owner several times. The other party's beauty had bewitched him, leaving him burning in desire. Upon seeing the other party in such an unkempt state, he couldn't help but feel puzzled. "Zhongshe, I beseech you to save me." Luo Qingyan's eyes shone as she recalled something. She immediately put on a tearful face that seemed as though she was going to kowtow to the other party at any moment just so that he would stand up for her. "Save you? What's wrong?" Raising his hand to stop the other party, Song Chao asked doubtfully. "Someone tried to barge into the herb garden earlier, and knowing that garden owner Shui disliked strangers disturbing her, I stopped him. Who knew that the other party would actually send his tamed beast after me?" At this moment, Luo Qingyang seemed nothing more than a pitiful weak lady. "Zhongshe, I really didn't know that he's a master teacher. If only I knew earlier, I surely wouldn't have stopped him." "Just because you stopped him, the other party sent his tamed beast after you?" Song Chao frowned. "Actually, it's not that master teacher's fault. Even though he isn't wearing a master teacher robe and he didn't indicate his identity, I should have been asked him about it beforehand. Zhongshe, I won't do it again. Save me." Luo Qingyang cried. Even though she seemed to be regretful of her actions, she was actually playing down her disrespect and emphasizing on the other party's domineering nature instead. This way, she made it seem as though Zhongxian was the one who was unreasonable. Not only did he not flash his identity, he even injured a person who was just acting within her scope of responsibility. Atrocious. How dare a master teacher act in such a manner? This cannot be overlooked. As expected, after hearing Luo Qingyan's distorted version of the story, Song Chao's face darkened. Master teachers were a representation of the Master Teacher Pavilion. As such, wherever they went, they had to make sure to act in a manner appropriate for their identity. How could the other party act so domineeringly as though he was a hoodlum? "Don't worry. The blame is not on you for this matter. When I see that fellow later on, I'll make sure to teach him a lesson. I'll drill the idea of respect into him and have him apologize to you." Song Chao waved his hands grandly. How could a master teacher beat someone who was just doing her responsibility? This was something that only a tyrant would do. "Thank you, Zhongshe." Seeing that the other party was going to stand up for her, Luo Qingyan's eyes glowed in excitement. She turned to look at the young man in admiration. "Did you see that? This is the might of a 4-star master teacher. Only a person of his level would dare to teach other master teachers a lesson. Humph, you sure acted arrogantly back then, having your tamed beast to sit on me. Let's see how you fare before Zhongshe." In her view, given how the other party wasn't even 20 yet and his cultivation was clearly beneath hers, even if he was a master teacher, he would be at most 3-star only. Before a 4-star master teacher, he would still have to bend his back and act obediently. "Zhongshe, I'll take you to him now." The more she thought about it, the more excited she felt. Thus, she offered to lead the way. "UN." Nodding his head, Song Chao placed his hands behind his back and followed Luo Qingyang. Under the lead of the maid, Zhongxian and group walked through a long corridor and arrived at a grand hall. At this moment, quite a large crowd had already gathered here. Taking a brief look, there were at least 100 people here. The banquet hadn't even started but the guests were already gathering in groups, discussing something. "Zhongshe, this is the banquet venue. The garden owner will be arriving soon to welcome all of you. I'll be leaving now then." Nodding her head, the maid took her leave. If her impression of the young man before was reckless, arrogant, and a braggart, after the other party offered a solution to her affliction, all of these negative emotions turned into admiration, and the other party became her idol. "UN." Knowing that the maid had to return to guard the entrance, Zhongxian waved his hands and proceeded into depths of the hall. "Garden owner Shui usually doesn't allow us into her herb garden. Why would she suddenly invite all of us over? Did something happen? This banquet can't be as simple as it looks. Don't you know? I've been outside during the past few days and I only returned to Myriad Kingdom City today. I rushed here as soon as I saw the invitation letter, so how could I know what is going on?" Rumors have it that the herb garden's centerpiece is severely ill, and it is on the verge of death. The banquet is just a cover. In truth, what she hopes to achieve is to bring all of us garden owners together to think of a solution. Centerpiece? You mean that? Shish, lower down your volume. This is all that I heard from my sources. As for what exactly happened, I don't have a clue either. Since that's the case, why is she being so secretive about it? To even go to the extent of using a banquet as a cover. That I'm not too sure as well. It's not like you are unaware of garden owner Shue's eccentric temper. She must have her own reasons for doing so. That's true. Amidst the crowd, the lowered voice of a trio sounded. Centerpiece? Could that be? Zhao Feiwu's eyebrows suddenly shot up. You know about it. Seeing that the other party seemed to have thought of something, Zhongxian immediately turned his gaze to her. I've once read a book concerning herb gardens, so I know a thing or two about it. Zhao Feiwu nodded her head. Suppressing her voice, she continued, they should be referring to the earth vein spirit vine. Earth vein spirit vine? Zhongxian asked doubtfully. Even though he had read a considerable number of books, he had never come into contact with information regarding herb gardens. As such, he found the name extremely foreign. UN. Zhao Wufei nodded her head. It's not really a secret. All herb gardens would have this. The earth vein spirit vine is a unique that grows by aligning itself with earth veins, absorbing spiritual energy, minerals, and water from it. Then, it uses all of these to nourish the ground, thus creating a superior field suited for growing all kinds of medicinal herbs. If one were to release their cattle at the same location, no matter how lush and concentrated the grass was, it was just a matter of time before it all disappeared. Medicinal herbs were the same as well. It was still fine to grow a medicinal herb in one location, but if one were to try to grow multiple medicinal herbs on the same field, the herbs would start competing for nutrients. And this would sap the field dry swiftly. Without nutrients to sustain the medicinal herbs, no matter how formidable the herb was, it would wither swiftly. The reason why herb gardens could supply a steady source of medicinal herbs without fail was due to the existence of this thing. Its decline and death meant that the entire herb garden was doomed. All of the medicinal herbs in the field would be ruined. Medicinal herbs growing on a field nourished by the earth vein spirit vine have a much more beautiful tone and significantly larger size. More importantly, its rate of maturity would be much faster as well. Some of the legendary 500-year-old herbs could reach maturity here in just 200 years. Otherwise, who could live for 500 years just to grow a single medicinal herb? Zhao Feiwu said. I see. Zhongxian nodded his head. He had been puzzled by how medicinal herbs could be grown in large groups without any adverse effect. After all, unlike normal grains, they required a huge quantity of spiritual energy and nutrients. No matter how fertile the ground was, it was very difficult to sustain such massive output. It turned out that it was due to the credit of this mystical plant. If they are really talking about the earth vein spirit vine, then it's no wonder why garden owner Shuer is panicking. Without the earth vein spirit vine to condition the field, given how the medicinal herbs were grown in proximity to one another, they would all surely shrivel swiftly. Zhao Feiwu continued. The earth vein spirit vine was like a formation providing the required conditions for the spirit herb's survival. Once it died, their source of nutrition would be stopped and they would shrivel swiftly. UN. Zhongxian nodded. Just as he was about to speak, a friendly voice suddenly sounded not too far away. Brother, did you follow your elders here to participate in the banquet as well? The one speaking was an amiable-looking young man. 2 dimples would appear on his face when he smiled, and this seemed to make him more approachable. Elder. Zhongxian was taken aback. That's right. The only ones who are privileged to receive the invitation letters are the garden owners, herb kings, and the herbologist clans. I have met the 8 herb owners and 7 herb kings of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance, and you clearly aren't any of them. Naturally, you must be here with your elder. The young man grinned. Herbologist clans? Zhongxian was perplexed. He knew of garden owners and herb kings, but what in the world were herbologist clans? You don't know of herbologist clans? Seeing the other party's perplexed expression, the young man widened his eyes in disbelief. This was part of the fundamental knowledge of herb gardens. To not even know this, how in the world did the other party manage to get in here? The cultivation of medicinal herbs require the care of specialist, and herbologist clans like us provide such manpower to the herb gardens, the young man explained. There were farmers to care for the fields and shepherds to care for the herds. Similarly, there were herbologists to care for medicinal herbs. The higher a medicinal herb was, the harder it was to cultivate it. Similar to pill forging, it was an extremely profound knowledge. To cultivate a formidable herb, not only would one require time, more importantly, one would also require skilled and experienced workers. The medicinal herb being unable to live up to its full potential was one thing. In the worst-case scenario, an error made could even cause the plant to wither and die. Using the spirit herb, noble grass, as example, this herb needed to be watered by maidens to live. If the maiden were to get into a relationship with a male, as soon as a drop of water from her were to fall onto the spirit herb, the herb would immediately dissipate into a cloud of smoke. It was exactly due to this nature of noble grass that it was used to check whether a lady was still a maiden or not. Melody rapture grass, it would take on an appearance similar to a human's eye once it flowers. To keep it alive, a person had to dance and sing to delight it with a melody. Otherwise, it would die very quickly. There were many of such bizarre medicinal herbs throughout the world, and without the required knowledge, it would be impossible to grow them. And this knowledge was passed down only within the herbologist clans who devoted their entire lives to raising herbs. Back then, when the master-teacher pavilion was organizing the occupations, herbologists had been raised in the discussion. However, this occupation had a very divided heritage and there wasn't any clear school. On top of that, it had very little to do with cultivation and skills, being a knowledge-oriented occupation. As such, it failed to be ranked within the 9 paths. Otherwise, its name would surely be listed amidst the occupations of the lower 9 paths. Chapter 520, Impossible to guard against. I am just taking a look around, I didn't come with anyone. Understanding what was going on, Zhong Xian shook his head. Just taking a look around. The young man was taken aback. Where were they? The herb garden of garden owner Shui. Even an envoy of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance would find it hard to come in here. To be casually taking a look around here. You must be jesting. He had seen the fellow come in earlier, the maid guarding the entrance had escorted him personally here, and her attitude was exceptionally respectful. Even his grandfather didn't enjoy such a privilege. This was precisely the reason why he stepped forward in the hope of making friends. Otherwise, as the successor to a herbologist clan, he didn't have the time to be chatting everyone up. Thinking that the other party was just trying to keep a low profile, he decided not to ask any further. Smiling, he introduced himself. I am Lu Zhon, a member of Myriad Kingdom City's Lu clan. Zhong Xian. Zhong Xian replied. So, it's Brother Zhong, nice to meet you. Despite reporting the Lu clan's name, the other party's expression remained unchanged. Lu Zhon's complexion immediately turned grave, and he hurriedly clasped his fist respectfully. As one of the 4 great clans of the Myriad Kingdom City, the Lu clan's power and standing was known throughout the entire alliance. Even nobles and powerful officials would have to respectfully address him as Lu Gongzi upon hearing of his identity. Yet, this fellow remained unmoved. It seemed like he must have a huge backing. Thinking so, his attitude became even more respectful. If he were to know that Zhong Xian had simply never heard of the Lu clan, it was hard to say whether he would puke blood or faint on the spot. After chatting a moment longer, Lu Zhon realized that the person before him truly knew nothing about medicinal herbs at all, and his confusion deepened. Other people were still guessing the reason behind garden owner Shui's invitation, but as the successor to a prestigious herbologist clan, he had already received concrete news about the matter. After all, many of the herbologist maids serving in this herb garden came from their clan. It wasn't a problem for them to gather some information. Just as everyone had guessed, a problem had cropped up with the earth vein spirit vine. This was precisely the reason why all those who were invited were the greatest minds in the topic of herbology. Yet, this fellow actually knew nothing at all. He had never even heard of herbologist clans. What exactly was his true identity for garden owner Shui to invite him over? While they were chatting, Luo Qingyang and Song Chao arrived at the hall. Song Shui, that's the fellow who laid his hands on me. Scanning the crowd, Luo Qingyang soon saw that hateful fellow and pointed him out. Following the other party's finger, Song Chao soon saw a figure. Zhong Xian was currently speaking to Lu Zhon, and his back was against them. Thus, Song Chao only saw the other party's back view. Even though it seemed weirdly familiar to him, he didn't connect it to Zhong Xian. After all, Zhong Shi seemed extremely close to Hall Master Sai of Honghai City back then, and so, Song Chao thought that the other party was from Honghai City. Why would someone from Honghai City suddenly appear here, and not to mention, how much of a coincidence would it be for the two of them to appear in the same herb garden? There's no mistake, it is him. He is the one who abused his identity as a master teacher to attack me. Song Shui, please redress my grievance. As long as you teach him a lesson in my stead, I, Qingyang, shall be yours. Luo Qingyang cuddled up with Song Chao with her voluptuous chests. She knew what men liked, and using her charms, she had always been able to convince them to help her. Otherwise, how could a young lady like her possibly open up a herb garden in Myriad Kingdom City? Feeling the astonishing buoyancy pressing against his arm, Song Chao immediately nodded his head and declared righteously, "Don't worry, even if you didn't say a thing, I wouldn't allow a person who sullied the name of master teachers to get away scot-free." Even though he knew that the other party was just making use of him for vengeance, he didn't feel put off by it. In the first place, it was his duty to safeguard the honor and prestige of the Master Teacher Pavilion, not to mention, such a beautiful lady was asking for his help. Following behind that curvaceous figure, they soon arrived before Zhong Xian and group. We meet once again. Knowing that the 4-star Song Shui would get back at Zhong Xian for her, Luo Qingyang was fearless. Stepping forward, she sneered coldly. Zhong Xian turned around and froze for a moment. Blinking his eyes, he asked doubtfully, "I thought you don't have an invitation letter? How did you enter the venue?" "You." Hearing those words, Luo Qingyang nearly spurted a mouthful of blood. "You still have the cheek to ask if I have an invitation letter or not. You're the one who snatched it away from me, okay? I've entered by tagging along with Song Shui." Suppressing her rage, Luo Qingyang turned to Song Shui and said, "It's this Zhong Shi who abandoned his honor as a master teacher and ordered his tamed beast to attack me. I beseech Song Shui to redress my grievance." However, Song Shui remained completely motionless. Luo Qingyang frowned. Just as she was about to further provoke him into action, Zhong Shi's voice sounded, "Song Shui? Oh, it's Little Song." Little Song? Luo Qingyang was stunned for a moment before frenzied joy gushed through her heart. This was a genius 4-star master teacher, an expert that came from a neighboring sect. Even the elders of Myriad Kingdom Alliance Master Teacher Pavilion would have to regard him as their peer, and yet, a young brat like you dares to address him as Little Song. Luo Qingyang had been thinking of how she should further fan the flames between the two young men, but from the looks of it now, there was no need for it. The other party had simply courted his own death. Not only her, even Lu Zhon, who had been trying to fathom Zhong Xian's identity, nearly keeled over. There were 4 stars on the emblem pinned on the chest of this Song Shui, 4-star master teacher. To address the other party as Little Song as though he was a junior. Lu Zhon hurriedly turned over to Song Shui in hopes of mediating the situation when the face of the genius suddenly distorted, and he looked as though he was going to cry at any moment now. Rookie Song Chao pays respect to Zhong Shui. At this moment, he could feel his heart crumbling. Even if the other party was a 4-star master teacher, he would have challenged the other party on his actions. But before this fellow, how could he dare to do so? Having been beguiled by the other party's impartation of heaven's will twice consecutively, his fortune had already run dry. Having experienced the other party's astonishing means personally in the past, if not in consideration for his pride and honor, he would have already run away straight upon seeing Zhong Xian's face. Teach him a lesson. Even if someone were to give him 10 guts, he wouldn't dare to do it. Song Shui, he's being disrespectful to you. Why are? Huh? Luo Qingyang was still immersed in the vision of Zhong Xian being pummeled violently by Song Shui, and she was just about to introduce some punishment methods to the latter when she suddenly realized what Songsha said and froze. What did rookie mean? It reflected one's ineptitude. Usually, only when juniors met with someone superior to them would they use such an address. This genius, a 4-star master teacher, was actually using this address with Zhongshe? Could it be that this Zhongshe, despite his young age, was even more incredible than Songsha? Are you for real? Luo Qingyang was about to burst into tears. She thought that a huge figure like Songsha would surely be able to teach that arrogant fellow a lesson so that she could get back at him. Who knew that the other party's backing was even bigger? Despite coming here to return the humiliation, she found herself being humiliated instead. What in the world was this? Lu Zhon's mouth also widened in shock. His eyes grew even bigger than that of a goldfish. He had been trying to guess this person's identity all along, and he had even thought of the Alliance head residence. But one thing he never imagined was that the other party would be a master teacher. Not to mention, a master teacher who could make a 4-star master teacher address himself as a rookie willingly. This was too fearsome. It was no wonder why a maid escorted him personally. He did possess the qualification for such treatment. Ignoring the shocked duo, Zhong Xian turned to Song Chao and asked, "Little Song, you wish to redress her grievance?" Initially, when he saw this fellow, he was a little surprised. However, he soon realized why the other party was here as well. In the treatment formula that he gave the other party, there were some medicinal herbs that needed to be fresh, and the only place to procure them was at the herb gardens. Most probably, he was here for that purpose. And no. I just happened to meet with her. I don't know her at all. Song Chao smiled awkwardly. Having fallen under the other party's impartation of heaven's will twice, he knew that the other party was a master teacher who was far superior to him. Before such a figure, how could he possibly dare pull his weight? You don't know her? Zhong Xian lifted his finger and pointed. Only then did Song Chao realize that Luo Qingyan's voluptuous chest was still pressing against his arm. I really don't know her at all. Shocked, Song Chao hurriedly jerked his arm and pushed the latter away. The comfortable buoyant sensation from before felt like needle pricks at this instant, pricking him to the point that tears were threatening to spill from his eyes. Song She. Being pushed away, Luo Qingyang finally realized that the formidable Song She wasn't just respectful toward Zhongshe. Rather, he was fearful of the other party, a person capable of inducing fear in a 4-star master teacher. What exactly was the other party's identity? Terrified, Luo Qingyang slowly backed away. At this instant, vengeance was the last thing in her mind. All that she could think of was how she could get away. She really felt like slapping the previous her at this moment. Why in the world was the latter so blind as to provoke a person of such standing? It was already huge blessing that she was still breathing at the moment. All right, I get it. There's no need for you to act like that. Ignoring Luo Qingyang, who was preparing to escape, Zhong Xian waved his hands nonchalantly. Then, something suddenly struck him and his eyes lit up. Turning to Song Chao, he said, "Right, do you need more soulless metal humanoids?" Previously, at the Soul Oracle Tomb, Sun Qiong had taken 4 grade 7 metal coffins, and of which, one of them was empty and the remaining 3 were filled with soulless metal humanoids. In any case, since those things were meaningless to him and a wealthy potential buyer was before him, he decided to try his luck. Soulless metal humanoid. Zhongshe still has more of them? Song Chao asked. I still have 3 more. On top of that, I have the coffins which they are stored in as well. If you're interested, I can sell the coffin together with it and give you a discount. 5 middle-tier spirit stones for 1 set, Zhong Xian said. Previously, he'd sold the soulless metal humanoid to the other party for 40,000 low-tier spirit stones. This time, the coffin was thrown into the mix as well, but the price was only 5 middle-tier spirit stones. There was indeed a significant discount in the price. 5 middle-tier spirit stones? Song Chao's lips twitched. I don't have that many middle-tier spirit stones. His entire fortune had run dry from purchasing the soulless metal humanoid from before. Even though he had recouped his losses by reporting the expense to the elders of his sect after returning to the Myriad Kingdom city, that was all in terms of low-tier spirit stones. Even if he were to strip himself bare, he could only produce one middle-tier spirit stone. Furthermore, that was a reward for obtaining the soulless metal humanoid. Then, how much do you have? Zhong Xian asked. 1. Song Chao replied honestly. That works as well. I'll sell you one grade 7 metal coffin then. This is a work from a 4-star blacksmith. It can serve as a comfortable bed which will cool you down in summer and warm you up in winter. More importantly, it's a set with the soulless metal humanoid you bought previously. If you were to return with it and study it thoroughly, you might be able to make a breakthrough in your soul cultivation. Zhong Xian flicked his wrist and passed a storage ring over. Storage rings were already worthless to him now, and he had several of them on him. In this storage ring was the coffin storing the soulless metal humanoid which Luo Zhu stole previously. Zhong Xian had already gained a deep understanding of soul oracles via Mo Hunxing, and so, these coffins and soulless metal humanoids served little purpose to him. It would be best if he could trade them for something more practical. Grade 7 metal coffin? Grabbing the ring, Song Chao immediately dripped a droplet of blood on it before sending his consciousness into it. After taking a look, his eyes immediately lit up. There were indeed many symbols commonly used by soul oracles carved on it. If one were to study the soulless metal humanoid alongside the coffin, it could indeed help to augment one's understanding toward souls. Alright, I'll take it. Here's your middle-tier spirit stone. As he said so, he flicked his wrist and passed a jade box over. UN. Opening a crack in the jade box, Zhong Xian immediately felt concentrated spiritual energy gushing straight toward him. Knowing that there was a middle-tier spirit stone inside, Zhong Xian nodded his head in satisfaction and put it in his ring. I have another 3 soulless metal humanoid and the higher-grade crimson metal coffin. If you're interested in them, bring more middle-tier spirit stones along with you to look for me. I'll welcome you anytime. After receiving the middle-tier spirit stone, the satisfied Zhong Xian looked at Song Chao as though he was a mobile sack of money. This fellow was indeed wealthy. Zhong Xian had profited significantly from the other party. As expected of a sect member. Yes. I'll definitely report the matter to my sect. If there's anything we need, we'll definitely look for you. Nodding his head, Song Chao turned around and left. However, right after taking a few steps, he suddenly froze and his complexion darkened. Tears began streaming down his face. Shit. I got beguiled again. Despite being on his guard, he still fell for the other party's tricks. He was truly a foe that was impossible to guard against. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.